Hey everybody, this is Ray, also known as the Singing Tallit. I'm here with JR. We're in the process of trying to get the onlinechurch.org website set up to stream the Facebook stream. But if all else fails, we've got information set up so you can actually join us on an online chat group that we're in, which is audio as well. And you can talk about the Torah portion or ask questions. I've included the website of the church in the description of the video. So that's rottfministries.churchonline.org. So it's we'll just see how it works out. In the meantime, today's Torah portion is Torah Portion Bo. And some people might say that's pronounced ba and not bo in the Hebrew, but there is some special characters used in the Masoretic text to explain why that is bo and not ba. It has to do with the authority with which something is said, because in this case he's being told to do something. It says go, you must go. Now let me see if I can get this thing shared over to my Facebook.
Here, I'm posting a link right now. There we go. I can get you on now.
Yeah, there we go. That's good. Yeah, leave that stuck up there. But hopefully people will be able to see that.
All right, well, I can get us on the church online now, too.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Figured it out.
And that's the kind of moments when you know that Yehovah has his hand.
Things are working out.
When he has his hand on you, when you have no idea how to do something and suddenly it works. That's when you know miracles are occurring.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and close the link to the church page. I keep the video. I got the conference open. All right, so let me see if I can get back to the page, the restoration of the Torah page.
All right, we'll see if we're good to go now.
And the group we're transmitting from is Restoring the Hebrew Roots of Our Faith.
Oh, yeah, you're on there, buddy.
Oh, excellent.
You're good to go.
Excellent. Make sure to turn down your audio or put yourself on mute on your phone so that it doesn't feed back while it's running.
Is it feeding back now?
I don't hear it. I didn't know if it was running. Just something.
I turned down the audio, everything except for the voice call.
Just something to watch out for.
Gotcha. We're ready to roll.
All right, looks like
Portion Bo.
Looks like we're running on YouTube too, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep. No, YouTube's not running, but we're running on the church online. We got 9 people in the.
Oh, excellent.
On church, so we can get rolling.
Anyone who's viewing us on the church online site, to the right of the screen is information to call in. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions about anything or any comments, I mean, none of us knows everything. We'd be glad to hear anything you may have picked up, bits and pieces. Like it says, line upon line, precept upon precept, and unfortunately for most of us, we're living in the age where we're picking up the pieces. We've, like it says in the Torah, we're the ones who suddenly realized, oh no, we have inherited lies. What are we supposed to do now? How do we change our life from what it was? Honey, will you share this video to the Singing Tallit profile, please, so that it can hopefully be rebroadcast.
I am posting on all the pages, letting them know we're live.
Okay, excellent. And remember, today's Torah portion is Torah Portion Bo. That's going to be Exodus 10, 11, 12, and 13, with a half Torah portion in Jeremiah. Excuse me, it's Jeremiah 46. And in the New Testament, or the Brit Hadashah, we're going to be reading from Luke 2 and from John 19. And if anyone else has some good spots that they know of that we can tie into, please, especially in the New Testament, let us know, because there's nothing more gratifying than to see the Torah proclaimed again in the New Testament among the apostles or Paul. Lots of times when people read Paul, their immediate feeling is that Paul has, for some reason, forgot his entire childhood, the God he believed in his entire life, and the teachings he was given concerning that Adonai, or Hashem, however they would have said it at the time. Suddenly he was going to forget all that because he had a vision on the road to Tarsus, where Yeshua talked to him and said, "Why are you persecuting me?" It seemed like a perfectly good question at the time. Hey, Paul, aren't we on the same side? Isn't that the idea? Don't you believe? Aren't you waiting for Messiah? Don't you believe in Yehovah? Don't you believe in the Most High God? Why in the world would you want to persecute me? I'm who you've been waiting on. Let me get that shared over to my page. I've been good with computers my whole life, but I tell you, I'm glad I got my wife for dealing with Facebook, because I'm not great at Facebook. They've gone so far to try to make it so easy to work with that it's literally, I can't do it. I'm sure somebody else would say this thing's not complicated at all, but it's got me. For instance, my wife just sent me a link to the broadcast we're doing right now, and I tried to repost it on my Singing Tallit page, and it says no, that's no longer available, and yet it's streaming now. So these are the things that I have to beat my head against when I'm trying to use this. I'm just going to quit with it. Alright, so in the Torah portion itself, if you remember from last week, we were at a place where we were talking about the plagues in Egypt. And something that I had asked people to do when they consider these plagues is to consider the fact that a person who was 100 miles upriver, up the Nile from the Pharaoh's house, might not have any idea what's going on at Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh's house, by the way, Pharaoh means big house. He's the guy in the big house. So they may not have had any idea what was going on there, or the battle that was ensuing, or any of the proclamations that Moses was making concerning the God of Israel. So to that person far away, all they saw was the river turn to blood. The frogs come out of the river, the fish die, the cows are dying, I'm covered in boils, I'm itching from lice, everything's gone crazy. And isn't Pharaoh supposed to be interceding on our behalf? Isn't Pharaoh a god? Hasn't he told us that he is the reincarnation of Osiris, that he is the embodiment of the sun god, or in the Greek, the Apollo? Isn't he the sun? Isn't he the shining one? Why isn't he addressing all these problems with these gods in the gods of the river, and the god of the frogs and the god of the cattle and all? Why isn't he taking care of these problems? Which is, in my opinion, why at the end of this, after the Passover meal, we're going to see a mixed multitude come out of Egypt. It's not just going to be people who would call themselves former Canaanites or the children of Abraham or any of that. It's going to be a mixed multitude. It's it's everyone who said, you know what, I'm a person of faith, I believe in the gods, they obviously don't side with Pharaoh, so I need to go with whoever they did side with, which is this guy, Moses, who a lot of people will probably recognize as being a prince of Egypt, and you may remember that cartoon, Prince of Egypt, which actually, you know, I'm not calling that canon, but the idea that he was in Pharaoh's house for so long, he was so long a part of what was happening there that, if nothing else, he was given, if nothing else, he was given the right to join the priesthood, which is why he is considered to know the mysteries of the Egyptians, and probably why the magicians themselves didn't think much of what he did at first. Because, remember, he threw down his snake staff, and the magicians were like, that's no problem, we can do that. And they threw down their staffs, and they became snakes. But his snake staff did devour theirs. It did, if nothing else, show dominance over theirs. And then you take it to the next step, you know, he turned a river to blood, and the priests were like, well, we can do that. I can make blood come out of this. And then, you know, with the frogs, they were like, we can call the frogs up out the river, that's no big deal. But when the dust was changed into something that was living, that was where the line was drawn, where they said, oh, we can't create life from lifelessness. You know, that's the finger of God that does that stuff. You know, they can do sleight of hand, and they may know things about the natural world that you don't, but they can't generate life spontaneously from nothing. And if you're using our hello.freeconference.com link, you can chat in there, and if you type something in that chat window, I'll see it. Also, if you'd like, you can just type into the live stream, and I'll see the stuff that comes up. And again, we're studying Torah Portion Bo. That's Exodus 10 to Exodus 13, Jeremiah 46, Luke 2, and John 19. All right, well, let's get into the actual Torah portion here.
Oh, we got another caller.
Oh, great, excellent. I wonder who it is. When you call in, make sure to put in there's a code you're going to need, and it is listed on the site. I didn't put the code.
The code is 311, or sorry, hold on, the code is, because I don't have, the code is 8707590.
And remember, if you're watching this in the aftermath, the call will be closed. And it'll change every week. There'll be a new access code, but it should be listed on the website, so you have the ability to actually call in and chat about it. And like I said, if you want to ask any questions, join in, please. I mean, we're here to learn. All right. So in the Torah portion itself, and the code is 870-7590. That is 870-7590. So when you call in, it will prompt you to enter that code and press the pound key and to leave your name. And what it'll do is it'll announce your name before it puts you into the group, which is great if there's like 20 people in the group. That way everybody will get a heads up that somebody's coming in, right, if they're right in the middle of talking about something. Now, let's get on ahead and get on into the word itself. Exodus, or Shemot, in the Hebrew, this is the story of Egypt and leaving Egypt. And that's what we're heading towards now, is the leaving from. So, Exodus 10. Oh, we have a caller?
Do it.
My wife said you have a caller. Did you mean on my phone just then? Honey, that was Maggie's let the dogs out alarm. It was on her phone if you heard something in the background. Because I don't know how to turn off the notifications on an iPhone. But
do you want me to play the Torah portion here in just a few?
Oh, like as an audio? I mean, I can play it right now. I mean, if you want to hear Max McLean read it, I think we'd probably do better reading it ourselves. But sometimes I like when Max McLean reads it because it sounds thus, thou, and this. But I mean, I read it in his voice. Exodus 10.
Let's do it.
And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, For I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, and I might show these signs before him. That's the way Max McLean sounds when he's reading the King James.
You sound exactly like him.
Yeah, believe me, I've listened to him enough that I can. My wife hates to hear him read it because it's so. It sounds so arcane when he's reading it. It sounds like something out of a weird old show. But I mean, you can listen to him read other things. He's a voice actor. That's the only reason he does that. All right, let's read on in Exodus 10. So basically, Yehovah said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh. I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants. So now you go show these signs." No, sorry, I'm going to be able to show signs before him because I've hardened his heart. So basically, if you remember, and at the end of the last chapter, Pharaoh was ready to make a deal. Pharaoh's like, well, things are looking bad around here. You may go and worship your God, but don't go too far away. You can go and worship your God and make some sacrifices. Just don't go too far. And then, of course, Moses is like, if we go and take these animals and butcher them and sacrifice them in a blood sacrifice to our God, the Egyptians are going to have a conniption fit and kill us. Because you got to remember, certain animals are sacred to different religious groups. For instance, in the Hindu culture, cows are sacred. If you're driving through India and there's a cow standing in the road, you're just going to have to wait. Because you can't go move that cow. Because that cow is holy and sacred, and you are not. And you can imagine that the Egyptians may have had something similar regarding particularly rams. You remember that Ram-Aziz was a name for Pharaoh. He built a city of Ram-Aziz, where he, and if you ever see pictures of it, it's literally got statues of big rams, lined up. And of course, the ram is a reference to the constellation Aries, and if you ever, which is the spring, by the way, spring constellation is Aries. The lambs are 1 year old at Passover because rams are bred, or lambs, I guess I should say. The ewes and the rams breed during spring, or the month of Aries, which is the month of the ram. And a year later, you take a yearling of the flock that is a male, that makes him a ram, and then you sacrifice him for the Pesach, which of course is he was born under the sign of the ram, and he's also butchered under the sign of the ram. So, and then of course you make a ram's horn, and that's a shofar. So, anywho, he's basically saying if we go and do this blood sacrifice in front of the Egyptians, they are going to go nuts and have us all killed, because it is taboo to murder. Well, I shouldn't say murder, but to kill these animals, which are considered sacred to the Egyptians. Because you got to remember, the Egyptians were for the most part agrarian, which meant that they grew with the Nile. Because you got to remember, Egypt is mostly desert. There's the Nile that runs in the middle of the desert, and basically Egypt is built around the Nile. The Nile floods every year during the dog days of summer, which is what they're called. When the dog star Sirius is in the sky, everything gets real dry, and then it kind of kicks off. Oh, the flood's coming, and then the Nile will flood. When Sirius appears, the Nile floods, and they know that. Oh, thank you, Osiris. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say Osiris? I meant Osiris. When Osiris, is giving them their blessing of the river flooding, which is where the star Sirius comes from. So they would live mostly upon grain that they would grow there in the river, or at the sides of the river. Animal husbandry was considered dirty to them. If you recall, when Joseph brought Jacob into Egypt, the Pharaoh gave them the job of being his animal experts, his animal husbandry men, because they were a nomadic people who knew how to deal with moving animals around. Egyptians are not nomadic. They're agrarian. They plant food and harvest food and eat. The problem for them was that they considered the animals themselves to be disgusting. I mean, there's lots of diseases that are transmitted between humans and animals that you will not get if you don't have animals. You won't get hoof-and-mouth disease. You won't get anthrax. I mean, there's lots of diseases that you're just safe from when you don't keep domestic animals. So the Egyptians considered it dirty. I mean, if you've ever seen pictures of the Egyptians, you'll notice that most of their children have shaved heads, which of course keeps them from getting lice. They shave their bodies, which again keeps them from getting lice. They don't have to worry about a lot of the filthiness that a lot of hairier peoples would have brought with them. And from what I've seen, Jewish people are hairy people. So, even though they tend to be a little thin on the top, if they have Caucasian ancestry. But yeah, the Egyptians did not like body hair. They didn't like animal interactions between humans and animals. Those things were kind of taboo. But the animals they did have were sacred animals for sacred purposes. So to butcher a lamb would have been a problem. And that's what Moses was talking about. So now in Exodus 10, we're seeing God say, listen, I'm hardening Pharaoh's heart because I'm going to work out some miracles here. I got things that I need to show people. So it doesn't matter what Pharaoh wants to do. He ain't going to get to do nothing but what I say for right now. So here we go. Exodus 10. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants. So even his advisors are going to be like, no, don't do anything. Don't give in. That I might show these signs before him. And here he's going to list the signs he will show. That you may tell in the ears of your son and your son's sons what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done in them, that you may know that I am Yehovah. Right? So he's saying basically, I'm going to do this so later when you're celebrating the Passover, you will remember what I did and who I am, because you are my people, and I have you for a holy set-apart purpose, right? He says, And Moses and Aharon came unto Pharaoh and said unto him, Thus says Yehovah, Elohim of the Hebrews, How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. So this is Moses speaking on behalf of the Most High to Pharaoh. Else, if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your coasts. And they shall cover over the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see the earth, that they shall eat the residue, that which has escaped, which remains unto you from all the hail, and shall eat every tree which grows for you out of the field. Now remember, we've already had the burning hail come, which has broken all the plants. The only thing that was left, remember, he says that the wheat was still growing, because it's a later crop anyways. It's 50 days after barley harvest would be wheat, which is Shavuot. The wheat was safe because it was still small. So he's saying now, if I send those locusts, then those little baby wheat plants are going to get devoured too. Is that what you want? And unfortunately, his heart's hardened, so it doesn't matter what he says. He's going to refuse. So, and they shall fill your houses and the houses of all your servants and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither their fathers nor their fathers' fathers have ever seen such a thing, since the day that they were upon the earth unto this very day. And he turned himself and went out from Pharaoh. It looks to me like he didn't even wait for a response. He's literally like, Yehovah's done told me, your heart is hardened. You're going to respond in the negative. I have declared what he said. I'm going to leave. And you may see something similar to this happen when Elijah shows up and makes the pronouncement to Ahaz and Jezebel, where he basically says, there'll be 3 years with no rain. I'm out. And he flees because, of course, Jezebel wants him dead. And he makes the pronouncement God commanded. He left and he fled away. All right.
I want to welcome Joe, who's joined us in the Virtual House Church.
Thank you, Joe, for coming, man. We really appreciate it. And like I said, if you have any questions or anything, please just ask away. It'd be best to do it in the free conference. It's best to chat in the free conference, though, because on the church, if we get the chat going, we'll have to keep re-inputting the information for people to see how to join the chat. So it's best to use the chat for you're chatting with people, which is what we're doing right now.
The Virtual House Church chat?
Well, if you look on the side of the website of Virtual House Chat, since you gave the people, it says it's since you gave the people the information to actually be able to get onto the site, if are you able to make that information sticky, as they call it, at the top, so it will always appear at the top of the page? Because if not, then as more people are chatting, the information will get farther and farther away, and it will become hard for them to find how to actually join into the chat. See if you can make that sticky.
Hey, real quick, Ray. I'm gonna. He said he's having a hard time getting logged in. I'm just putting the link back on our on the Virtual House Church so everybody can see it.
Sure. And I'm gonna go ahead and I gotta disconnect from it because it's hard for me to. I can't upstream and downstream at the same time. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that out. And remember, there's gonna be some. There's going to be some lag between the live broadcast and what you're seeing, coming through the network, because it's got to filter its way through the internet and multiple servers, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm not sure how long it is. It might be 30 seconds to a minute delay. I don't know. But let's get back into the work. So Moses leaves. He says he leaves out of the presence of Pharaoh. How long shall this man remain with us? All right. And they shall fill your houses. And he went out from Pharaoh. That's 10:6. So 10:7. And Pharaoh's servant said unto him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Just let him go, that they may go and serve Yehovah their Elohim. Knowest you not yet that Egypt is destroyed? And these are his servants. They're saying, just let them go. Don't you know that we've already been destroyed? Egypt's already destroyed. Don't starve us out completely. And Moses and Aaron were brought again unto Pharaoh, and he said to them, go, serve Yehovah your Elohim. But who are they that shall go? So he's like, all right, I'll make a deal with you. You can go, but who are you going to take with you? And Moshe said, we will go with our young, and with our old, and with our sons, and with our daughters, and with our flocks, and with our herds, for we must hold a feast unto Yehovah. And he said unto them, let Yehovah be so with you, as I will let you go, and your little ones too. Look to it, for evil is before you. He says, not so. Go not yet, ye that are men, and serve the Lord, for that is your desire. And they were driven out Pharaoh's spirit. So he's basically saying you're not going to get to. You don't need your children. Your children are safe here in Egypt. There's brigands out in the wilderness. There's people who will kill them. Your children should stay here, and your old people, they should stay here. Egypt is safe. Keep them here in Egypt. They'll be safe with me. And they're my property. But he didn't say that part. That's probably just implied. All right. So. And Yehovah said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for locusts, that they may come up upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail had left. And Moshe stretched his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all day. Now you recall the east wind, the kings of the east, stuff like that. And it tends to be where bad things come from. Came all day and all night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. And the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt, and they rested in all the coast of Egypt. Very grievous were they. Before them there had never been such a plague of locusts, nor after them was there such. Now remember, this is a terrible, horrible thing. But at the same time, you can eat locusts. Locusts are kosher. You can eat locusts. You may not want to eat locusts, but you can. You can't eat a cricket, but you can eat a grasshopper. And that's what a locust is. It's just a grasshopper. When grasshoppers are individuals all by themselves, they act like the grasshoppers you see in the field. Like I live in South Georgia. I got a field full of grasshoppers. They hop around. You catch them, you can fish with them. But when there's 10,000 of them together, they secrete enough hormone and pheromone that they turn into eating machines. They stop acting like individuals, and they begin to act like one entity that has one purpose, which is to feed. And they feed and destroy everything they touch. You can watch documentaries on YouTube, and other video streaming sites of just documentaries about locusts and the way that they behave. Because really, they're just grasshoppers. They're not some special thing. I mean, they are big, but that's partially because the way they grow when they're under the influence of certain, chemicals or epigenetic stimulation. And when you get a bunch of them together, they get real stimulated. Let's see. And they covered the face of the earth, and they ate every herb. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste, and he said, I have sinned against Jehovah your Elohim, and against you. Now therefore forgive, I pray, my sin only this once, and entreat for Jehovah your Elohim, that he may take away from me this death only. He's like, just take this one death away. Frankly, the other ones have already been taken away. And he went out from Pharaoh and entreated Jehovah, and Jehovah turned a mighty strong west wind, which took away the locusts, and called them into the Red Sea. And there remained not one locust in all the coast of Egypt. But Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he would not let the children of Israel go. And Jehovah said unto Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there was darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. That's very dark, when you can feel it. And Moshe stretched forth his hand towards heaven, and there was a thick darkness in the land of Egypt for 3 days. They could not see one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all of the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. And you may, this may trigger a little, wait a second, don't we know some other times when there was 3 days of darkness that people went through? Wasn't Yeshua in the ground for 3 days? Wasn't Jonah 3 days in the belly of the whale? Wasn't that the sign of the prophet Jonah? And Pharaoh called unto Moshe and said, go, serve Jehovah, only let your flocks and your herds stay, and let your little ones also go with you. So it's like, okay, I'll make you a deal. You can go, you can take the kids with you, go ahead and go worship your God, but leave behind all of your animal wealth. So it's like, you don't need to bring those animals out. What are you going to give them to water? You can't water them in a desert. There's no water. Don't take them out. They're just going to die. Leave them here. I'm playing devil's advocate for the Pharaoh in this sense, because we get the very abbreviated version of how that conversation may have went. So let's just assume the Pharaoh had plenty of good reasons for them not to take those animals. And Moshe said, excuse me. He said, go and serve your Lord, but let your herds stay. But you can take your kids with you. I understand you want to teach them about your God. And Moshe said, you must give us also the sacrifices and the burnt offerings that we will need, that we may sacrifice unto Jehovah our Elohim. Therefore our cattle must go with us. There shall not be a hoof left behind. For therefore must we take to serve Jehovah our Elohim. We do not know what we must serve. We do not know with what we must serve Jehovah until we come thither. In other words, he's saying, listen, Pharaoh, I don't even know what he's going to require. For all I know, he's going to make us butcher every animal we have for him. He might make us sacrifice everything we have to him. I don't know what he's going to want from us, so we're going to have to take him with us. But Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And Pharaoh said to him, get away from me, and take heed that you listen to this. We will look at each other face to face no more, because the next time I see you, I'm going to have you killed. That's what the Pharaoh said to Moses. And Moses said, you have spoken well. I will not see your face again. So this is an instance where Pharaoh was literally prophesying without knowing it, similar to the way that the high priest, Ananias, was Ananias the high priest when Yeshua was crucified, or was it Caiaphas? I think it was Ananias. Ananias was Caiaphas' father-in-law. Can't remember. Anyways, whoever the high priest was, he prophesied. He said, it's better that one man die than the nation die. And he was literally prophesying what would occur, though he did not realize he was doing it. Same way with Pharaoh here. He has declared a prophecy even without realizing that it's what it's. And of course, you hear people say, speak life, speak life, speak life, because we're always hoping that when we're speaking life, we really are speaking a prophecy over what's going to happen. And if the words that come out of our mouths are always positive, if they're always words that are good, then if any one of them were to come to pass, then that would be a good thing. But, if we speak an evil word, even if it's just one, 1 in 1,000, and of all those things, Yehovah says, that's the one I'm going to make come true, then it's going to be bad, because that's the one thing you were going to wish you had never said, if that's what comes true. All right, so does anybody have any thoughts or any ideas? Are you seeing anything, JR, in the chat?
I'm trying to get a hold of Joe. He's for some reason can't get in on the chat room, but I'm going to go ahead and just repeat what they got to do one more time, just so kind of clear. Basically, you can call 1-605-475-4120, and the access code is 870-7590. And then also you can just click the link and then put in that access code at 870-7590. I like this Torah portion, man. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it really just kind of reminds me of just of what's coming in our days. You know what I mean? There's going to be another Exodus, and people are, we're going to end up leaving spiritual Egypt or spiritual Babylon. And I've got a bunch of notes, but I'm not up to speed on. I got to look through them real quick because I've been trying to get all this stuff out.
Oh yeah, hammer out the technical details, definitely. The something they consider talking about a second Exodus. People will say that, like, there's the rapture theology, there's rapture doctrine, right? I'm not a rapture doctrinalist because I'm not, I tend, if I'm going to be a Baptist, I'm going to be an early 1800s Baptist. I'm not going to be a post, what was his name? There was a particular Bible scholar that got famous. His name starts with a D, and I can't remember. Let me see if I can look him up. Darby, I think is his name.
John Darby.
Yeah, I think it was Darby.
He used the replacement theology.
Yes, yeah. Darby was the one that popularized the idea of a rapture. Now that's harpazo in the Greek, which I understand. If you don't know nothing, you could read it that way. That it's describing a miraculous thing, and we all want to say, God is certainly capable of miracles. Well, I mean, yes, absolutely, and we are witnessing miracles happen right now in the text of Exodus. But as we saw in the previous Torah portion, the fact that Moses was saved by Pharaoh's daughter, who certainly had to let her daddy know that she had this baby, because I'm sure he was like, you ain't pregnant. Where'd this kid come from? Obviously, she said, well, I found him, and now I have adopted him. The river God gave him to me, if you want to look at it like that. And he's like, that's a Hebrew baby because it's circumcised. So, I'm getting rid of the Hebrews. Just the fact that Moshe was allowed to live in itself was a miracle. I mean, and it's not even stated as a miracle, but it is. There's so much stuff that we see in the scripture that absolutely qualifies as a miracle, even though it's just kind of written like just fact as you read it. Take, for instance, the New Testament said, if all the books had been written that would describe the things that Yeshua had done, there wouldn't be enough books in the world to contain them all, because so much happened, and all we get is just the highlights, little bits and pieces of information to help us get a bearing on who we should be, who Yehovah is, and who these people that lived so long ago were, and what they were doing. I mean, what we see, Moses is basically just doing what he's told. I mean, he's not creating theology, he's not creating doctrine. If God tells him what to do, and he does it. I mean, that's it. That's the whole thing. He said, you'll be my mouthpiece, and Aaron will be your mouthpiece. You do what I tell you, and you tell it to Aaron, and Aaron will tell it to people who you feel like aren't going to be able to listen to you because you have problems speaking. Miracles don't have to be, you get called up into heaven. The point I was making, let me get back to the original point, about a second Exodus, is we're going to see in Exodus the appearance of a cloud by day and a fire by night. This is the Shekinah This is the presence of the living God in the midst of his people, right? So Peter says, a cloud of witnesses. Or you'll be called into the cloud, raised up into the air. Okay, these words, when you look at the Greek meanings, they don't necessarily, like it says, the word air, translated air, is the word that it means to respire. That's what you do when you breathe. See, I'm breathing, so I'm respiring, right? Because I'm blowing out. I'm breathing in and I'm blowing out. That's what air is. So yeah, you could believe that it was to float up in the air. Or you could look in the Old Testament and see, well, what does that mean? Where have we seen something about blowing in and out? You know, when they cross the Red Sea, talk about God's nostrils blowing the enemies out of the way. God, when he speaks to Moshe, he speaks to him mouth to mouth. You know, the Ruach HaKodesh is the breath, or somebody say wind, but it's breath. The breath that sets you apart. So what is the breath that sets you apart? It's the Word of God. So yeah, the miracle in the second Exodus is going to be, you're called into the cloud. You're harpazo, which means you are captured away, right? So he's going to take you and put you into safety. He's not going to give you up. He's going to take you and put you into safety. He's going to put you into the presence of the cloud, and it will also shelter you. You know, you'll be under the shelter of the cloud, because you got to remember they're in the desert. So when the cloud by day appeared, that was a huge cloud that gave them all shade, and they weren't burning up in the desert. So take the next step, and it says, and you're going to be called into the air, or to breathe, which means you're going to be re-given the words of God. You're going to be given the words just like was given to the children of Israel as they were in the desert, because they spent 40 years being trained in the Word. They spent 40 years doing what he had instructed. And don't get me wrong, they made mistakes right towards the end. I mean, when they got to the land of Midian, I mean, there was mistakes made. People were killed. People had to be executed. You know, there was a recompense for sin that took place. And but there was also, you know, a healing and a standing between. All those things occurred. You know, I try to look at the future in those eyes. I don't try to think Superman, you know, flying in and shooting laser beams out of his eyes. I try to think more like, you know, what are we seeing in Exodus? I mean, we see events that frankly can be explained in a natural way. There was a whole documentary on the Discovery Channel where they talked about when a volcano explodes nearby, this is what happens. And they went through and showed all the river turning blood red, the fish and all the critters die in the river. The frogs come running up out the river to get out of it so they don't get poisoned by the water. Then there's so many of them, they breed and they die everywhere. And then come the flies to eat all the dead carcasses, and then come all the lice and everything. I mean, they made a fine point, which basically is just saying the world is Yehovah's to use as he will. And to some people, they will say, oh, that's coincidence. And to the people that believe, they will say, oh, that is a miracle. And that's always going to be the dividing line. Do you have the faith to believe what someone else will say is illogical to believe? Say, why suppose a God when you could suppose no God, and the same thing would have happened? Well, some people have the capacity for faith. Those are the children of Abraham. Some people do not have the capacity for faith, and those children will always live. I'm calling them dumb. In fact, they're probably very scientific people, but they lack the ability to cross that threshold of faith. They can't enter the house of God because they can't cross the threshold, and faith is the threshold of the house. All you need is to take one, like, I don't know who's seen, I assume that most of the people have seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That's the one with Sean Connery in it with Harrison Ford. When he gets to the temple, there are several tests. He has to go through 3 tests, right? The first is the test of the Penitent Man. the penitent man kneels before God. So he kneels down, and the big saw blade doesn't chop his head off that had been chopping everybody's head off, because he knelt down before God. And it says you have to go walk in the Word of God. So you have to know the name of God. So what's God's name? And of course he says God's name is Jehovah, and he steps on a J and almost falls through the floor, because there's no J in Latin, and it's an I, and then he spells it with an I, and he's able to walk it out through. But then he comes to the leap from the lion's mouth, which is the leap of faith. Can you make a leap of faith? And as he looks across the bridge, he looks and he can see, 50 yards away, or maybe 40 yards away, another door. And there's just an open chasm between the two doors. And there's just no way across. There's nothing to grab onto. There's no way a person could jump it. And he just looks at it and he says, no human can do this. And then, his dad says, son, you have to have faith. It's a leap of faith. You have to have faith. You have to take the leap, that you cannot see what's going to happen. So, because he loves his dad, he sticks his foot out and he just falls out the door and lands right onto the bridge that is right there across between the two doors. But someone had painted the floor to match. They had painted the bridge to match the floor, so unless you were actually standing on it, you wouldn't even realize it was there. It was completely camouflaged. And that's the way that it works with faith, is you have to be able to cross that threshold so that you can begin to realize you are standing on a secure structure, even though your eyes said you were not. You cannot trust your eyes. Faith is the evidence of things that are unseen. You can't trust your eyes. Abraham gets a message from Yehovah. He says, Abraham, I want you to leave the land of your fathers. I want you to go to a new land where I'm going to give you something. I got something waiting for you in this place. And of course, you don't know. Did he know Yehovah? The Babylonians had many gods. And Abraham was a Babylonian. His father was the maker of gods. He was a guy that made his fortune making idols. And he says to him, go and leave this land. And I got something waiting on you if you'll do what I say. And Abraham moved out in faith, and he became the inheritor of a huge land, which we're still doing our best to get a hold of today. All that came from one man having faith in something that he didn't know anything about.
I'm going to admit this up real quick.
Sure.
Speaking of Abraham, I'm sure a lot of people know this, but there's probably people who don't. Abraham was from Ur, which is
Ur of the
Chaldees. Basically, that was Babylon.
Yeah, Ur of the Chaldees.
And And what happened was he was called, and through faith, he left his whole entire. He left everything. His lineage. You got to think back then. One of the things that you had was like family. That was you could trust in. He left everything to follow Yahweh. And the thing about it is that he was the first person, I think in Genesis 14, to be called a Hebrew. The word Hebrew means to cross over. And just as we cross over today, when we, find the faith, when we find the truth, and we decide that we're going to walk in the truth and nothing else, we too become Hebrews. And we become heirs to the promise through faith. Right. And that's why Abraham is considered the father of our faith, because I can't even imagine leaving, everything you have to follow, somebody he didn't even know. We know of Yahweh. He didn't have a clue. I just thought I'd mention that.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly what I was saying, is that faith is the crossing of that threshold. You have to have faith. He was the first one to cross over, right? That's Hebrew, right? That's what it means, to cross over. So God's like, you want to be a part of my house? Walk across the threshold, and we'll make a deal. And he's like, okay, I'll do that. And he did. He crossed over through faith. That's what made him a Hebrew. That's what makes you, that's the first step. You have to have faith first. You have to believe in what you honestly can't see. Yehovah is the invisible God. It's not like you can, take a picture with him or get a selfie or something. You're going to have to learn to see what he's doing in your life. For me, I can honestly say everything I have came from him. I have done nothing. And a long time
Absolutely.
ago, when I was a young child, and I was raised up in the church, non-denominational Christian church, pretty much a Baptist church in the South. A long time ago, I said to him, I said, if you are real, then you have to take care of me, because I'm not going to do anything until I know that you are taking care of me. I won't do nothing else. And a long time ago, I said that to him. And it took me growing up and crying out to him for help to see it begin. But once I, from my heart, cried out for help, he's been helping me ever since. I mean, I cannot claim glory for anything. There is nothing that I have done that he has not given me the will or the heart or the desire to do, or the means to do it. I mean, literally, there's nothing. He's paid my way. He makes my work easy. He's given me the opportunity to be here, testifying to his glory before everyone who's going to see this, and as long as the internet's there, this testimony is going to be there, to his glory. When I'm a 80-year-old man, assuming I make it that far, there'll be a almost 40-year-old version of me out there testifying to new generations of his glory, because he's the one that made it all happen. Anyways, let's move to Exodus 11. Let's move on to 11 now, since we got quite a few more things to read. So, and Yehovah said to Moses, "Yet will I bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go. And when he will let you go, he will surely thrust you out altogether." He's like, when this was done, he's going to want you gone. "Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor jewels of silver and jewelry." And let's look at that word, borrow. Let's see if we can get a more accurate. I'm going to leave that loading. There we go. And that word borrow of his neighbor, sha'ol. I got a feeling that word means more than borrow. Because...
what is it? What's the word?
Sha'ol. It's S-H-A hyphen A-L. Sha'ol.
That's shao. That's Paul.
So that's that means to ask, to borrow, to inquire. Let's see, to demand. So there's a difference between requesting something from someone. It just says to ask or to demand. When you go to someone and make a demand, you're saying, "Give me the stuff." When you request, you say, "May I please have the stuff?" And unfortunately, in Jonah 4:8, we see this phrase, "He desired death for himself." So Jonah requested death in that sense. But in other places, from the way it's used, it means to demand. So, like, obviously you don't demand things from God. You request them. You don't demand that the creator of the universe do something. You could demand that he keep the covenant that he's made, but of course I'm sure he would just remind you he is keeping the covenant he made, because he's not a man that he would lie.
What were they wanting to do with all this jewelry, I'll ask you?
Well, and all that comes later when they actually put it to use. I mean, at first you could think, oh, well, they're plundering the Egyptians. They're taking their just due. Now, last week we talked about how in the Haftorah we read, we saw Yehovah say through Ezekiel, I believe it was. It may have been Jeremiah. I think it was Ezekiel. Or maybe it was Isaiah. I can't remember. But one of the prophets he spoke through said, "I'm going to give Egypt over to Nebuchadnezzar as payment for the good work that he did destroying Tyre." So, in this sense, you could see him giving the wealth of Egypt to his Israelite slave people as payment for their slavery. So you say, all right, the debt was long ago paid. Now you're going to get your recompense, which is to actually be paid for the service. And that's why the term sha'al, some people say It's literally telling you that they plundered the Egyptians. They literally went to him and said, you see what our God's doing? Give us your stuff. Make it our stuff. And Moses said to Yehovah, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in Egypt shall die, and from the firstborn of Egypt that sit upon the throne, even to the firstborn of the maid servants that are behind the mill, and all the firstborn of all the animals. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been one, nor shall there ever be like one this again. But against any of the children of Israel shall not even a dog move his tongue, against man or beast, that you may know that I am Yehovah, and I do put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. And all these
enmity.
Oh, you got it. It says enmity there. And the
no, I mean, when he said a difference, I was just guessing that meant enmity.
Oh well, and we'll look it up specifically, but it just says difference in the King James. We'll look it up in a second. And all these servants shall come down unto me, and bow down themselves unto me, saying, get out, and all the people that follow you, and after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in a great anger. And Yehovah said to Moses, Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt. So he's saying, Pharaoh's not going to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied. And Moshe and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he may not let the children of Israel go out into his land. Now, we might look at this and say, well, that doesn't sound right, that he would why is he hardening his heart? How can he make a decision? Well, I'll give you a couple other interesting examples. When Yeshua heals a blind man, sorry, I'm sick, but when Yeshua heals a blind man, his disciples say to him, why was this man born blind? Was it his sin or his parents' sin that caused him to be born blind? And Yeshua said, it's not anybody's sin that caused him to be born blind. He was born blind so that my, wonders could be shown to you. Same concept. He's like, the whole purpose of that man's life was so that this would be recorded and that you would see, you would be the witnesses to what has happened. And you may remember when the Assyrians came and destroyed Israel, Yehovah will tell you, it's him. He said, I sent the Assyrians. I'm the one that destroyed Israel. And then the next thing you know, he tells Assyria, now I'm going to destroy you for destroying Israel. And if you're an Assyrian, you're probably like, well, why did you make us do it if you're just going to kill us for doing it? Because he doesn't have a covenant with you. I mean, he doesn't owe you anything.
Set apart.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, JR?
I said the difference means to be set apart.
Exactly. Well, that's Kodesh, is to be set apart. That means...
Well, this one it's Palah, and it means to distinguish, difference, to separate, to be set apart.
Gotcha.
Or set apart, not to be set apart, but set apart.
Gotcha. So he's basically saying you two are not the same. In his eyes, these are two completely different things.
I want to mention something real quick that I wanted to mention earlier.
Sure.
Something we were talking about earlier. You know, we said that it says, now what do you think we might find, then he said to them, you better hope Yahweh is with you, because when I let you and your little one go, beware, for evil is in front of your faces.
Right.
And basically, evil is Ra, and Ra is the sun god, and it's throughout the Bible we're going to see continuous. What are you doing there?
For me, I wouldn't look. I try not to spiritualize things when I hear them, because yes, Ra, but you're going to see that term used over and over again in the Hebrew, and Ra'ah, I believe, is to look at something, but Ra as the sun god. He said
in Egypt right then they had the one-eyed god that was Ra. So that's why I thought it was kind of
well, and later he was like, there's been different gods take different thrones, so to speak, in Egypt. For instance, for a long time in Egypt, well, I'll say a long time, several generations in Egypt, they had only one god. They had the one god, which was called Aten, and Aten was the god that overthrew the cult of Amun, which is Amun Ra. At some point, he became Amun Ra. But
right.
he's also...
Well, see, Ra was also the god of all the pharaohs. Like, he was the one that they...
He's the sun god.
Became, he was the... Huh?
Because he's the sun god. That's what we're saying, is that Pharaoh is the incarnation of Osiris, or actually he's the incarnation of Horus, which is the son of Osiris, which is the sun god. But Osiris is also the sun god. He's just the one that goes into the underworld. You got to remember, the sun rises in the east, it sets in the west, right? In our modern conceptualization, we know, well, I hope you know, that the earth's not flat and that the horizon is not the end of the world. And, the sun is actually going to come back up because we're going around it and the earth's spinning around. So what they said was every day, and this is the same thing you see in the Greeks, they said that Apollo rode his chariot across the sky every day and then went down into the underworld and did battle and then came back up in the other side, and after his battle was complete, he came back and was the sun again. Same thing about Osiris. Osiris goes down, and these are where these words come from. Check it out. Okay. So Osiris, he goes over the horizon and down into the land of the dead, right? And he spends time in the land of the dead, and then he comes back again. He's reincarnated, and he returns again as the sun. Okay, so he goes down. Osiris's evil brother is named Set. Okay, so Set is his brother. So Osiris.
Isis Horus.
I'm sorry, say again.
You'll see the IHS on the crosses, and that's Isis, Horus, and Set.
Well, you could say Israel is Isis, Ra, and Elohim. I mean, what is it? Is that what it means? I mean, we could make it mean that. I mean, I don't.
Honestly, that's what it means.
Well, I thought it meant in his service. They'll tell you it means in his service.
When you look at, the guy who was the founder of the Jesuits? Basically he's the one who first came up with it on the cross, and it was on his cross, on his symbol, and that's where you got the first person with IHS was him. And it's been kind of handed down. But that's also how you spell the word.
That's how you spell the word yes.
It is.
In Latin, which is also the word for the sun.
It definitely is.
Because when you say yes, I agree, you are moving your head in the motion that the sun takes as it goes up and down throughout the sky. And when you say no, you're looking down at the horizon, not looking up. You're looking at the horizon with your head. Let me get back to the thing with Osiris. So Osiris has got an enemy Set, right? So Osiris is the sun. What do you call the time of day when the sun goes down? I'm asking you, this is a call and response. What do you call the time of day when the sun is blank? It is doing
Sunset.
what? It is setting. Yes, the sun is setting. The sun is now engaged in a battle with the god Set. The god of darkness is the god Set. So that's where the term sunset. And the word horizon is Horus rises. That's what a horizon is. That's the place where Horus rises. So that's... A lot of these words we've got in English just come straight out of the Egyptian. That's why a lot of the Mason stuff is intertwined in understanding what was going on in Egypt and understanding the mysteries of the temple, etc., etc. I don't put too much stock in it myself because you can get lost in all the conspiracy theories and everything else associated with it. When I look at him saying the evil's in front of you or Ra's in front of you, he might simply be saying, the desert is hot and filled with the sun. If you go out there too long, y'all gonna die. You need water. You need Egypt. Egypt is life. If you step away too long from Egypt, Egypt is the good land. If you leave the good land, you will die because out there, Ra, the sun god, will cook you alive in the desert. Could just be that simple, or also he could be simply saying that there are men who are evil out there, which are brigands and raiders and Bedouin, who are out there in the desert and who might look at you and say, well, here's a bunch of vulnerable, dumb Egyptians with no weapons. Let's go get them. We'll take them out and make them our slaves. I don't know what Pharaoh was saying. I just know his heart had been hardened, so he wasn't going to do what was asked of him for the purpose of showing and demonstrating Yehovah's glory. And Mindy, I'm ignoring your statement about the four corners of the earth. And that's intentional. And I tell you, these flat earthers, they get my goat. Only because there are clear scientific ways to demonstrate that's not correct. Uh-oh. I got a message that says no volume. Did the feed stop coming through with sound? Oh, the call failed. Give me 1 second, let me reconnect.
Welcome to free conference. Please enter your access code or PIN followed by the pound sign. You will now enter the conference. After the tone, please record your name to be announced to other callers in the call. Then press the pound sign to enter the conference.
So now everybody can see it. Ray. Now everyone can see how the system works.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, sorry, I lost the call. That's why I got no volume message.
Has joined.
Got it.
Sorry, I lost the call. That's it. I'm in the man cave, so it's the cell signal's real low in here. It's a metal building. So
Can you hear me?
all I heard was you say that you got me back. That was it.
All right.
I've been out the loop for about 3 minutes there. I was just a jabbering on and got a note that said no volume on the message. But I'll just that along those lines. I mean, you know, maybe he's just saying Ra, as in the sun god will cook you if you go out in the desert, or that there's evil men waiting to ambush you if you go out in the desert. You know, people who are not of Egypt are waiting to waylay Egyptians that don't know any better and go too far from the Nile. You know, I'm not going to assume I know what Pharaoh meant. I just know that what happened was for Yehovah's glory. You know, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I assume that Pharaoh was probably, like any good politician, willing to compromise as long as he didn't lose. You know, but it looks to me like Yehovah has said it doesn't matter what Pharaoh wants to do. Pharaoh is going to do what I tell him to do, which is he's going to have a hard heart. And don't get me wrong, hey, Yehovah loves a stiff-necked people. He likes a woman that's real hard to work with. He likes a bride that when he's done breaking her, everybody will be like, I don't know how he managed to get that hard-headed woman to walk in line, but he did. You know, that's his glory, is to take someone who can't nobody get sit straight, and he makes them sit straight. That's impressive. All right, so Exodus 13. So Yehovah spoke unto Moshe, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine. So he's laid claim to the firstborn of Israel. Now, I assume that this means firstborn sons. If you look carefully, where it says among the children of Israel, this is probably Beni-El, or Beni-El, not Bat-El. Let's see, first among the children, yeah, that's Ben. So it says Ben, those are boys. So, and I know some people may say, well, there's not male nor female, nor Jew nor Greek. You know, well, I don't know how to argue with that. But it says here in the Torah, firstborn males. And frankly, ladies, I don't know why anybody would want to be put in this position, because this is not a position of power and prestige. This is a position of servanthood. The firstborn of Israel are to be priests, and the priest has one job. Well, I guess I say one job with two sides. He ministers to Yehovah and to Yehovah's people. That means he is a servant to both the God of Israel and to the people of Israel. He doesn't get to own property. He doesn't get to have a job that makes money. He has to live off of the people being willing to continue making sacrifices and offerings as ordered by Yehovah. That means if they're not doing their job and keeping things running tight, steadily the food supply is going to get cut off to them, because if they fail to educate the people, if they fail to lead them right spiritually, then sooner or later people will be like, I don't want to give no sacrifices. I ain't giving them my money. I'm keeping my money, you know. And that's the problem in the modern church, by the way, today too, is the way Paul said it was. He's like, look, you don't yoke, you don't muzzle an ox while he's treading out grain. And because basically, if the ox is treading out grain, I mean, the ox is walking through this grain field, and it looks like, I mean, it's a smorgasbord. He's like, oh, this is great. I can eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. And that's the privilege of the work animal. It's his privilege to eat and eat and eat and enjoy the benefits of doing this job. So if you are a person who does not want to take the time to study the scripture, to learn everything that you can, and you're looking to someone else to do it for you, then you're going to need to financially support that person, because frankly you owe it to them. And it's their honor to get to receive your sacrifices that you're making to Yehovah. That's the idea. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Being a priest doesn't mean you get to order people around and tell them what to do and get everything brought. It's like being a king. That's not what it means. A king is the greatest servant. A king assumes full liability for what goes on in the kingdom. That means if the dude 50 miles away made a mistake, somebody can go to the king and said, you made a mistake. Your person made a mistake. This is your fault, your majesty. And then you have to say, okay, I'm gonna pay for the damages. I'm gonna, get this thing straightened out. I'm gonna take care of the details. I'm sorry this happened. This is my fault. I should have educated my servant better. I should have, given him the proper tools to do his job. It's liability. It's assuming the cost of being in charge. And the cost of being in charge is not the ability to hurt others. That is not the cost of being in charge. Okay, that's not the way our king deals with things. Our king teaches us to be responsible for what we do. And if anybody wants to, in a different discussion, talk about corporations and LLCs and what liability means, I'll be glad to do that on a separate time. Because don't get me started on the 501c3 nonprofit corporation known as the modern church. Don't get me started, because I can go on and on. All right. So this is he's laid his claim to what is his. The firstborn of animals and humans are his. The men are. So this, he says. So this.
Hey, I'm going to point out something real quick.
Sure.
I was just thinking of it. A little shadow is just as Pharaoh.
Where's the call?
Yeshua or Yahweh will give this for so we can be free from the kingdom.
I have a really low phone signal. Can you repeat that, Jerry? I hope I didn't lose the call. I lost the call. Great. Something else I don't know how to do on an iPhone. I don't know how to tell it to hook up to the Wi-Fi so that it doesn't lose signal. And the iPhone has completely lost service. Let me see if I can turn on the audio from the conference here. Apple, I hate you. And I mean that in the same way that Yehovah hated Esau and loved Jacob. That is to say, I do not wish to make any contracts with Mac because I do not like their products. But I could change tomorrow, so don't quote me. You know, give me just one moment. I'll get this phone call working again. Ray.
Gotcha. Ray.
Has joined.
You're back.
All right, everybody, please forgive my rant about Mac products. I'm a computer technician. I'm definitely a PC guy, and I like Android software. I don't like any company that has to have its hand in my pocket before they'll let me download something for free. So, you know, I think maybe some folks out there can understand. All right, let me see if we can get has the live stream picked back up?
Yeah, the live stream's kicked back up. Can you hear me?
I can hear you again. Yeah, I'm just, like I said, this
Okay.
signal, sometimes it just drops right out, and I missed everything you said because right as you were talking, it all bombed out on me. And Jasper was saying he lost connection to the live stream. Can you confirm that it's up on the ROTTF Ministries?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, well, let's get back into
It's
it.
back up.
All right, well, we'll get right back into it then. And I assume it's probably picked back up on the site too. Let's get back into Exodus 13:3. And Moses said to the people, remember this day, which is the day you came out of Mitzrayim, or misery, right? Isn't that where we get the word misery from? Egypt, Mitzrayim. Out of the house of bondage. For by the strength and the hand of Yehovah brought you out of this place. There shall be no leavened bread eaten. Leavened bread. Okay, so leavened bread is bread which you have added yeast to. Leavened bread is bread which has been allowed to rise. Back in the old days, and by the way, I made some wine this last year and saw this firsthand. The world is packed full of yeast and leavening. Everywhere that there is dust and dirt, you can just about be guaranteed there is some kind of leavening. Did I lose the call? I sure did lost it again.
No, you're on.
Oh, I can't even tell. Man, it's Mac.
Yeah, it's quiet.
iPhones, man. It's killing me. I'm actually using my daughter's phone to connect and using mine for the stream. What was I saying? Oh, man. Am I getting old man brain? I'm only 40.
You're saying you don't like the Mac.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, don't get me started on that. No, I definitely don't. But the idea of the leavening, okay. So with the bread, they would take it and, you know, you'd grind up your grain and you'd get all three parts of the grain. You'd get the outer shell, which is for fiber. You'd get the white spermzola, which is white flour, which is just basically sugar. And then you'd get the wheat germ, which contains all the amino acids and nutrients you need to actually digest white flour, because the human body cannot digest white flour without enzymes added. And if you ever pick up a loaf of white bread, you read on the side it says enriched white flour. That means they added the enzymes into it so that when you eat it, it doesn't cause your stomach to go insane trying to process something that it can't process. So when they would make the bread, they would take it and they'd, you know, pat it out, beat it out, and then leave it sitting for a while and to allow it to rise. You keep it in a warm place, warm, moist, typically is what you want. And the bread would rise, and then you'd bake it, and that's how you get your bread that's tall instead of a flat pancake, right? So you're not allowed to do that. You have to pad the bread out and then cook it, and that's how you make your matzah, or your bread that is unleavened. It's not saying that it doesn't have yeast in it, because yeah, it's got yeast. If you made it in the world, it's going to have yeast touching it. But you're not allowed to allow it to rise. It's not allowed to get puffed up. And some people say this is because since they had to leave in such a hurry, every year you need to remember that you had to leave in a hurry so you didn't have time to let your bread rise. So that's why you eat the matzah. And then other people will say, well, it's a spiritual lesson about not becoming puffed up, and then they'll say, well, the matzah is got holes poked in it to keep it from rising, right? So it's pierced, and it's striped in the way that it ends up. And of course, I'll say, well, that's a reference to Yeshua being pierced and striped, and that he's the bread of life. He's the unleavened bread. So let's go on from there. And the day they came out.
Hey, real quick,
sure.
Ray, I want to say this. 1 Peter 1:18 through 19. For you know that it was not perishable, things such as silver and gold. You were redeemed from the empty way of life, handed down to you from your forefathers, but by the precious blood of Yeshua Messiah, without blemish or defect. And basically, the unleavened bread it's one of the feast days. It has the
7
first
days.
day and the last day are high holy days,
Right.
but it all points to Messiah Yeshua. All the feast days do.
Right. Well, I can certainly agree with that. And of course, he says that I am the bread that came down from heaven. And that's his direct quote. That's not an assumption. That's what he said.
Well, Yeshua came from Bethlehem, which actually means house of bread.
Oh yes,
in Hebrew.
And the constellation Virgo is also Bethlehem, which is the house of bread, which is could be exactly the time of year when he was born, which would line up with the concept of him being born around Sukkot, because since right, and since Tabernacles, see the fall equinox takes place on September the 21st, 22nd, right around there. So typically, the feast never occurs until after that equinox. But that is the borderline between Virgo and Libra, is that borderline between those 2 months. September...
Revelation.
Right. Well, September is the 7th month of the year, which is sept, right, in the Latin. So the 7th month of the year is September, even though nowadays we call it the 9th month of the year. But back in the old days, it was the 7th month of the year, because the year was categorized differently. Because there's a good half of the year, which is the 6 good months, and then there's 6 bad months of the year, basically, which is the difference between summer and winter, or the difference between the time when food grows readily and when everything is frozen and dead. Depending on how far north you live, certain cultures, like in the northern latitudes, in the Nordic areas, they see the sun disappear for several days during winter and just not come up at all. And if you've ever been up to like Alaska, up on the northern end of the pipeline, they have like month-long nights that just never end. And they made a horror movie called 30 Days a Night about that.
Yeshua came into if he was born on Sukkot, that would have meant he was conceived on Hanukkah, which is the 25th of Kislev, and that's the darkest day of the whole year. Mm-hmm. Which would have meant the light came into the world on the darkest day of the whole year.
Well, it would depend. The 25th of Kislev last year was, yes, Christmas. But sometimes it's, a month ahead of that. So sometimes it's not the darkest day of the year. But this is what I tell people when we talk about the difference between a lunar and a solar calendar. Is a solar calendar appears to be accurate. And when you use it for the course of, let's say, one human lifetime, it's just as accurate as it can be. As far as you could tell, it may end up a few seconds off, but you wouldn't even know it. I mean, if you didn't have highly accurate timing devices, you wouldn't know that it was off. Okay, but when you carry that same tradition for 1,000 years, then the seasons become unsynced with what time of year you think it's supposed to be by the sun. Because there's a difference between the tropical year and the actual standard year that like the Gregorian calendar is 365.25 days per year. But the actual tropical year is like 365.2465 whatever decimal, infinite decimal place. It's not precisely accurate. It's always off by, I believe, 6 seconds a year is the problem. And over time, that's why I threw in the leap year, to try to account for the difference. This is the difference between the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar is 365 days, then went to 365.25 days. But the actual measurable tropical year that modern science is able to account for is 365.24 whatever decimal place. Because as the Earth revolves around the sun, it doesn't, like the turning of the Earth doesn't actually line up perfectly at the end of every year. Like when we're in an ellipse, right? We're not in a perfect circle, so we're going around in an ellipse around the sun. And for all you flat earthers, just cover your ears and hum. I'm just going to talk about stuff that you might not want to hear. So as we're going around the Earth is spinning, right? As it's going around we're going around the sun, the Earth is spinning. And like, let's say that we're going to put our position on the globe as it spins around. When we come around all the way around again, we're not turned in exactly the same spot we were when we were at this particular time of year the year before. So we end up with a year that's actually a little different than what we think of as the year. When we count our days by sun up to sundown, sun up to sundown, sun up to sundown, we do not end up with an accurate count for the year, because our actual revolutions around the sun don't quite line up with the days as we're spinning. And that's the difference between the two. It's called a tropical year. And that's just, it ain't gonna mean nothing to nobody. But the lunar calendar actually is more accurate over long periods of time. Over the centuries, the lunar calendar doesn't really change. Now, every year it's said that the moon is like 3 inches farther away from the Earth than it was because of tidal shifting and the pull of gravity and such. But as far as we're governing the month by the appearance of the new moon, it allows us to, every once in a while, imagine it like this. The solar calendar appears to be accurate, but in fact is steadily moving out of accuracy. It's like trying to be a sharpshooter, right? You get your eyeglass and you put it down the barrel of the gun and you target your target just right, and you hold it right there and you're like, all right, I'm ready to make my shot. But steadily, the crosshairs are moving. And you're like, wait a second, I get my shot straight again. All right, I get ready to shoot, but the crosshairs start moving again. And that's what the solar year is like. Just it creeps at a very slow rate to throw itself off. All right, so I don't cut you off. I'm going to use this raise your hand button before speaking. Is that you, JR, that wrote that message to me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where would I see that?
Yeah, I've got like a. You'll hear it. You should. Hang on.
Where should I hear it at? Because
I'm going to. You should hear it on the site where where we're talking at the chat room thing.
Okay, I'm going to have to turn it on then so I can hear it.
Well, don't worry. I'll use the regular thing.
Yeah,
I'm just trying not to cut you off because there's like a delay.
No problem. Just notify me, because if I turn on the speakers to hear what's happening there, it'll like it's feeding back into everything I say feeds back in as an echo, because it'll be echoing through the system. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll just use the regular Facebook page.
Yeah, just all right. Well, hold on. Just tell me on the chat, or just tell me right here with your voice. Notify me like that. That'd be the best. We'll do it the old-fashioned way, But what were we talking about? I know it's probably something about the sun or the constellations or something. I don't.
Now, real quick, I was thinking, y'all's holy calendar, there was only 360 days, right?
Right. Well, no. See, what it was is some people speculate that at some point in the past that the Earth actually was on a perfect circle orbit around the sun that was 360 degrees, like right around. And
I know during Noah's time it was 360.
Right, and the idea is that some cataclysm happened that the Great Flood was the result of this cataclysm, right?
Flood, that's what it was.
And then the Earth had its orbit shifted from what it was, and it became, this more of a wobble that we've got now, as opposed to being a very set 360-day year, which would have lined up with the idea of a 30-day month, and then 12 months a year, 30 days. But like I was saying about the lunar calendar, the lunar calendar is more like being an archer. Like when you pull back and you aim, your body naturally has a little bit of wobble to it, And if instead of you trying to force yourself to be straight, if you actually embrace that little bit of wobble and you learn to time what you do with the wobble, you can use the wobble to your advantage to make your shot. In fact, when an arrow shoots, it actually bends the whole way that it's when it's going to its target. The idea is that with the lunar calendar, yes, lots of times it's not accurate, but every once in a while it's perfectly accurate. And you'll see that happen when a blood moon hits. Like these last few years we had 2 sets of blood moons at Sukkot and Passover, right? So those are times when the earth, the moon, and the sun are all in a line together in the heavens, like straight with each other. Those are the markers of an actual real equinox. Like that's a real deal equinox. That's when everything is in a line and everything is perfectly level. And that is the blood moon. That's the lunar eclipse, right? That's a blood moon. So if you use the lunar calendar, it is gonna wobble left and right, but every once in a while you're gonna hit it right on the money. Where with a solar calendar, you start out as accurate as you can get, but you steadily move from the target. So anyways, that's what I try to explain to people like that. That's why we use the lunar calendar, because in the long run, over millennia, the lunar calendar is going to be more accurate. The solar calendar is going to fail you. Nowadays, we use like timepieces that are based on like a cesium clock, which is based on the wavelength of a cesium atom's vibration. And even those things can fail because as you move devices through space and time at different rates, time dilation occurs. And this has been proven. I mean, this is straight out of Einstein's theory of relativity. If you put a clock in a rocket, send it around the Earth, it'll come back slightly slower than the clock on the ground that was synced with it when you left. Simply because motion through space causes time to slow down, even though it's not perceptible to humans. But when you're dealing with, the long-term motion of planets and stuff like that, point being, let's stick with the lunar calendar. So anyways, Exodus 13:4, I rabbit trailed, sorry. Exodus 13:4, this month they came out as a month of Abib. Now Abib, according to Nehemiah Gordon, is a reference to the condition that the barley is in at that time of year. Now Abib is considered the first month of the year. Now it's also called Nisan among the Jews, and that should immediately make you say, Nissan, isn't that a Japanese automaker? And if you look at the symbol for Nissan, you'll understand why why they're called Nissan, because the symbol for a Nissan automobile is the sun with a line through the middle of it, because Nissan is when the spring equinox occurs. That's when the sun is supposed to be level with the equator. So that's why Nissan is Nissan. If you look at, like I said, look at a Nissan automobile. That's their symbol. It's the sun at equinox on the equator. So Abib has to do with the condition of the barley. So if the barley's in Abib, you can eat it. You can cook it and eat it, but it's not really ready to be harvested. Remember, barley is really considered animal food, not human food. So it's really for feeding to the animals. But you can eat it. But when the barley is in Abib and the moon becomes new, then the month is declared Abib. When it is not in Abib and the moon becomes new, it's declared to be Adar 2. But that requires being in Israel, and that requires people growing barley in Israel to even account for. And of course, most people still using the rabbinical calendar, which is a lunar solar calendar, which I guess is relatively accurate. I've seen rabbis say that it's coming to pieces, and I've had rabbis say that it's as accurate as anything that NASA's produced. And I don't know who to believe, honestly. I'll just say that, we have the ability to know when Abib is now, and there's nothing wrong with using both the land, that is the earth, and the heavens to testify to what it is. Because that's your two witnesses, right? You got the earth and the heavens testifying to what month it is and when it begins. So Exodus 13:5, and it shall be when Yehovah shall bring you into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore unto the fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. So here's your first feast commandment, right? 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, and the seventh day shall be a festival to Yehovah. Unleavened bread shall you eat. I unmuted the speaker. Whoops. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days, and there shall eat no leavened bread be seen, neither shall there be leaven seen in any of your quarters. Now, it's a tradition in the Jewish home that the children, the young boys in the household, will help their father find the leavening in the house. In fact, really the tradition is Daddy is supposed to hide some leavening in the house, and the children are supposed to search, Easter egg style, right? Search the house for the leavening that's in the house. And when they find the leavening, they take it out, and usually they have like just a little bit, and they have it like in a feather or something, and they'll take it outside and they'll burn the leavening outside. And every year you're supposed to burn the leavening out of get the yeast out of your house. Now this has a completely understandable reason, because if you've just gone through winter, typically people in cultures, previous to us, like we've got all our modern conveniences, but when you lived in a place that snowed, when it snowed, you didn't leave the house. You stayed inside, and you burned your fire and your stack of wood that you had in the house for heat, and you hoped and prayed that it would last you all the way through winter, and that your food would last all the way through winter. Okay, so by the end of the winter, when you came out of that house, you had been trapped in that house with all the yeast and other animals and things that had snuck in that you never even saw. All that was in that house, hiding in there, right? So you had to do what was called spring cleaning. I mean, that's what we do nowadays. We have what we call spring cleaning. It's time for us to do some spring cleaning, right? So you get out and you clean all that leavening out of the house, which is exactly what God's saying. He said, you go and clean the leavening out of your house, get it rid of it. Don't let it even be seen in your house. You got to get all that dirt and dust, anything that they would call leavening, you got to get out of your house. Because he's basically telling you, you got to clean your house out. And then he's about to tell you, you got to clean your temple out. And we'll get to that in just a second. So let's see, unleavened bread. And you shall show this sign, show your son in that day, saying, this is what was done, because of which Yehovah did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. So you're supposed to teach your children. We're doing this to remember that we left Egypt. And it shall be a sign unto you and unto your and your own hand, upon your hand. Oh, here's the mark of the beast, right? And it shall be a sign unto your hand, and for a memorial between your eyes. Oh, there's that mark of the beast again, right? That Yehovah's law may be in your mouth, for with the strong hand he has brought you out of Egypt, right? And so shall therefore you will keep the ordinances in the season from year to year. Okay, so he's established a feast. And it shall be when Yehovah shall bring you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore unto you and to your fathers, that he shall give it to you, that you shall set apart unto the Lord all that openeth the matrix. That's the womb. The matrix that's an old English way of saying the womb. That is the woman, where the woman has a baby from. That's what he's talking about. And every firstling that cometh out of the beast which you have, the males shall be Yehovah's. Okay, so here we go. Remember I said it was sons, right? And he's saying, look, every firstborn male, be it male of an animal or male of a person, they belong to me. And every firstling of the donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you do not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn men among your children shall that you also redeem. So he's like, I don't want the asses. I don't want the donkeys. But if you don't redeem them by giving me a lamb instead, you need to kill it. And that shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? That you shall say to him, by the strength of the hand of Yehovah, he brought us out of Egypt and from the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that Yehovah slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of men and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I sacrifice unto Yehovah all that opens the matrix, being males, but all the firstborn of my children I redeem. So you can redeem them, huh? And it shall be for a token upon your hand, and for frontlets between your eyes. There's that mark of the beast reference again, right? For by the strength of the hand of Yehovah he brought you out of Egypt. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, and Elohim led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But Elohim led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up and harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, Elohim will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Sukkot, and encamped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And then Yehovah went before them by day in a pillar of cloud, and led them by the way at a pillar of fire, to give them light to go by day and by night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from the people. Okay, so here's the question. Why is it say Elohim led them out of Egypt, and then it says Yehovah was the pillar of cloud and the fire by night? I give you my opinion, because I'm not sure exactly how to get anybody else's opinion on this one. JR, is there anybody that could talk, or anybody that's trying to say anything?
No, we've had some people come in and out, but nobody stayed.
All right, no problem. What it looks to me like, and this is just my opinion, I think the reason that it says Elohim there instead of Yehovah is because he's talking about what the people see. This is a mixed multitude leaving Egypt. So Elohim is a generic term for gods, or Els, right? So even when Joseph spoke about it, Joseph said, the gods will lead you out of Egypt, and in that day take me with you. So in that sense, it is Yehovah Elohim who is leading them. But because the people don't really know who he is, they see it as the gods leading them out of Egypt. Because remember, we talked about, what does it look like for a person who lives 100 miles away from Pharaoh when the river turns to blood and the frogs come out and the fish die and the cows die and then darkness that you can literally feel envelops you for 3 days, and then your children die? Your firstborn children and the firstborn of all the animals die? I mean, you got to be wondering, what in the world is going on? What's happening? Why have the gods gone crazy? Why has Pharaoh failed me? Why isn't he doing his job? You know, if you look at it like that, it can, in my opinion, I think that this is why it refers to Elohim as leading them out, because all these people had their own concept of the God that was leading them out. Moses knew who it was, but I bet every Israelite didn't know who it was. It's just they knew that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whoever that may be, that their ancestors had worshipped, was the God that was leading them out. And to the Egyptians, it might have been the gods of the river, the frogs, the cows, the lice, and whatever else. Because
we'll see that in Exodus 32, that they don't really know.
Well, exactly, and they don't.
You know what I mean? That they're still a little lost on.
Yeah, they don't know who this guy is. They're following Moses. I mean, that's, in my opinion, that's part of why Moses wasn't even allowed to go into the land, because they just would have made him a god king. They would have been, be our Pharaoh, Moses. Yep. You know, and that was never supposed to be the way it was supposed to be. It's Elohim, Yehovah Elohim is the king of Israel. And in Samuel, where the Israelites they say, give us a king, right? And Samuel's like, no, I'm not going to give you a king. Yehovah is your king. What are you talking about? And they're like, no, give us a king like the Hittites have. We want a king like the Philistines have, so we can have somebody to fight these Philistines for us. And he's like, Yehovah is your king, and Yehovah does fight these Philistines. And the way he does it is by making all of you get together and work and cooperate like you're supposed to and defeat the Philistines, right? So they say, well, no, we want a real king. And he talks to God, and he's like, I don't know what's going on, but these people are trying to say that. And Yehovah talks back to him, and he's like, listen, they're not insulting you, Samuel. They are insulting me. It's not an issue of what you see, Samuel, because I know what they're doing. They are confirming before your witness that they do not want me as their king. So give them a king. And Samuel goes and said, listen, if we get a king, he's going to take the best of your sons and he's going to make them charioteers. He's going to make them run before his chariots. So he's like, they're going to become foot soldiers and cannon fodder. He's going to take the best of your daughters and make them his bakers, which I'm sure means he's going to put a baby in them if he wants to. He's like, I'm just going to claim your daughters from me if I want them, and they'll be my wives or my slave girls if I please. He's going to take the best of your crops, and he's going to eat them and give them to his generals. He's going to take the best of everything you have and look you right in the face and say, I have every right to take it. And you will have no defense against it because you did not want Yehovah to be your king. Okay, and that's what he said to him. They're like, just give us a king. You know, and they did, and who'd they choose? They chose Saul to be king. Why did they choose Saul to be king? What was the defining?
They got a king after their own heart.
Exactly. And how do you describe a king after the heart of a man? What does a man's king look like? He was head and shoulders taller than every other man in Israel. He was the biggest, baddest man they could find. He was big, bad Leroy Brown. And they said, we want big, bad Leroy Brown to be our king, because then when the Philistines see him, they'll get scared. And they were dumb to think that. And don't get me wrong, Saul only had a 500-man army. He did a lot with a little. He didn't tax. He went and asked rich Israelites for money to support his troop efforts. I mean, he wasn't like David. David got in there and made it an empire. David's like, I'm just going to take. He got in there and started taking. And then Solomon took even more, you know. And he started making more deals and married into every tribe everywhere in the world and got a god for every one of them. And then, you know, what does it all boil down to at the end? You know, then his son, Jeroboam was
Rehoboam or Jeroboam?
I think Jeroboam was the general. I think Jeroboam was the general, and that Rehoboam was the son.
You might be right. Let me look.
Yeah, check it for me.
Maybe right.
Yeah, please check that for me. But anyways, his son, and this is relating to what we're reading about. His son basically was like, how am I going to handle my father's kingdom, right? And God, by the way, had already told Solomon, it's over for you and your family. You have ruined it. I'm going to take the tribes from you, and I will lead. And Jeroboam was his son?
Jeroboam's the one that got, he's the one, northern kingdom.
Right, that's the general. Jeroboam was the general. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon then. So Solomon's son...
No, Jeroboam was the king of the northern kingdom.
Right, that's...
when they got scattered, because he's the one that worshipped other gods.
Well, yes, but he is who God gave the kingdoms to. If you look, you'll see the prophet Nathan...
Oh, you were saying Rehoboam is Solomon's son.
Right.
Like you were saying, okay, never mind.
Right. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. So... basically, so he comes up to this where he has to make a decision, and he goes to his advisors, and he has old men that are Solomon's former advisors, right? And he's like, listen, how am I supposed to deal with these people being upset about how badly Solomon taxed them? What should we do? And his old wise servants are like, listen, man, release them from the burden your father put them under. If you'll show them kindness and grace right now, they will serve you forever. And what did the young men say who had
raise the taxes?
Exactly. You put a yoke on them like they've never seen. You show them who's boss. You get in there, and I love the way he talks about it. He says, because if you think my daddy, it's like this compared to me, boy. That's what he said. You can read that for yourself, and I won't go into it. But trust me, it's a very locker room conversation that he has with the people there. Basically saying that if you thought my daddy was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. You know, instead of doing what the wise men had instructed, he went and took his own counsel, and the counsel of ignorant young men who were honestly brats raised in wealth in a place that only a generation before had been, everyone was an agrarian. And suddenly, in one generation of empire, they destroyed the whole thing. Anyways, let's go ahead. So, let's see. So Pharaoh, it came to pass that Pharaoh had to let the people go, and God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, because he knew if they saw war, that they would back off. And of course, here we go again with the idea of Elohim is leading them out versus Yehovah, because nobody's really familiar with who Yehovah is at this time. Had he taken them straight to the land, that would have been a problem, because there was no unity among the people and there was no understanding of who they were meant to be. So we haven't seen the Sinai yet. When they get to Sinai, we're going to see them begin to learn to walk in who God wants them to be. And that's where he'll say to them, I want you to be a kingdom of priests. He's like, I want you to be kings and priests. That word is Melech and Zadik. And when you combine those two words together, what word do you get? Do you know what name you get when you combine those? Melchizedek. That's right. He's like, I want you to be Melchizedek. So when you read in the book of Hebrews, a new priesthood is, well, I mean, in a certain sense, yes, it's new, but it's exactly what it was supposed to be from the beginning. It's what was yelled down from Sinai. He said, I want you to be Melchizedek, Melech Zadik. I want you to be Melech Zadik. I want you to be kings and priests. I want you to be a kingdom of priests. So that when people come and they see you and they say, wow, you guys know God like best friend know him. Like he's your daddy know him. Like
Abraham.
Exactly. You believe whatever he tells you. And he'd be like, yeah, pretty much. You do whatever he says. Yeah, pretty much. That's it. But, of course, had he not provided for them, why would they do it? But, of course, when we read in the Scripture, it's never the question of God's arm being too short. And we'll read in one Torah portion where he'll say, basically to Israel, is my arm, and he's not talking about his arm, by the way, too short to give you what you want? When they're out in the desert and they're crying out for quail and all that, for meat. He's like, do you think my arm's too short to satisfy your needs? And he's not talking about his arm, by the way. Look closely at the Hebrew, and you can look in the Strongs and see what he's actually talking about. Because if there's one thing I can tell you about the Most High, he considers Israel his wife, and he talks to her the way men sometimes talk to their wives in the bedroom, when their wife is saying something to them that they don't like. And a man might say to her, have I not given you everything you wanted? Have I not, turned my eye from every other woman for you? Have I not given you a home to live in? Have I not made our children safe? Did I fail you in some way? Is that why we're having this argument? Am I not doing my job? Because I feel like I'm doing my job, So anyways, let's move on to Jeremiah 46:13. And we're getting the Torah readings. We're actually getting them from, you can get them from the Torah Portions .org. You can get them from Sheep.
I got them from First Fruits of Zion.
First Fruits of Zion. Yeah, there's multiple websites. Something I'm really glad to see is that there does seem to be a movement steadily growing and gaining in strength of people returning to understand the Hebrew roots. And one of the ways that people do that is they go back and start reading them Torah portions. Because if you're the kind of person, it's like if you're the kind of person who says to yourself, well, I'm going to celebrate Hanukkah because Yeshua was there. Well, let me tell you what. I guarantee you Yeshua read the Torah portions. Because when he gets up and reads from the scroll of Isaiah, he's reading a half Torah portion. That's a half Torah. And in fact, we will read it. I believe it's at Yom Kippur. I think it's the Yom Kippur portion. It's that or Passover. I can't remember which, but I think it's Yom Kippur. And he's like, and what you're seeing is being fulfilled in your viewing today. That's all he added to it. He's like, and what this says, that's what's happening right now. All right, so let's go into Jeremiah. So Jeremiah 13. We're going to go Jeremiah 13 all the way. If I can load up
28.
13 to 28. All right. So the word of Yehovah spake to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, should come and smite the land of Egypt. Oh, we read about this last week. Declare you in Egypt, and publish in Migdol, and publish in Noph, and in Taphanes, and say, and those are Egyptian cities, stand fast, and prepare yourself, for the sword shall devour around and about you. Why are valiant men swept away? They didn't stand, because Yehovah did drive them. And he made many to fall. Yes, one fell upon another. And they said, Arise, let us go again to our own people, and to the land of our nativity, from the oppressing sword. They did cry there, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is but a noise. He has passed the time appointed. As I live, saith the king, whose name is Yehovah of hosts, surely as Tabor is among the mountains, and as Carmel by the sea, so shall he come. O you daughters dwelling in Egypt, furnish yourself to go into captivity, for Noph shall be a waste and desolate without inhabitant. Egypt is like a fair heifer, but destruction cometh, and it comes from the north. A heifer, by the way, is a virgin female cow. Also her hired men are in the midst of her like fatted bullocks, for they also are turned back and are fled away together. They did not stand, because the day of their calamity was come upon them, and also at the time of their visitation. And the voice therefore shall go like a serpent, for they shall march with an army, and come against her with axes, as hewers of wood. They shall cut down her forest, says Yehovah, though it cannot be searched, because they are more than the grasshoppers, and are innumerable. The daughters of Egypt shall be confounded, and shall be delivered unto the hand of the people of the north. And Yehovah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, says, Behold, I will punish the multitude of No, and Pharaoh, and Egypt, with their gods and their kings, and even Pharaoh, and all them that trust in him. And I will deliver them into the hand of those that seek their lives, and into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of his servants. And afterwards it shall be inhabited, as in the days of old, says Yehovah. But do not fear, you, O my servant Jacob, and be not dismayed, Israel, for behold, I will save you from afar off, and your seed from the land of their captivity, and Jacob shall return, and be in rest and in ease, and none shall make him afraid. Fear not, O Jacob, servant of Yehovah, for I am with you, and for I will make an end of all nations whither I have driven you, but I will not make a full end of you, but correct thee in measure. Yet will I not leave thee wholly unpunished. So basically he said, don't worry, I'm going to reconcile with you, but you're not getting away without any punishment. You know, it's like he's saying, don't worry, baby, everything's going to be all right. But yes, I am going to take your credit cards. You don't get to have the credit cards no more. But don't worry, everything will be all right. And it's and if you look, if you consider what happened, and we talked about this last week with the Maccabean revolt, and Jason Oniad moving to Egypt and building a new temple in Egypt, the Temple of Leontopolis. That's, at least it looks to me like he's actually prophesying that here. He's saying, you know, Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and destroy most of Egypt and sack different cities in it, and it's going to break down the political structure in Egypt, right? So after Egypt is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar is then, he passes, and his son gets defeated by Darius the Mede and Cyrus, you know, the Persian. And the Medo-Persian Empire comes in. In a couple generations, you see Israel's allowed to return, and that's Nehemiah and Ezra's time. And they return, and they rebuild the temple, and they rebuild Jerusalem, the wall around Jerusalem, which Nebuchadnezzar knocked down. And then you see the Greeks come. And when Alexander the Great arrives at Jerusalem, he comes to the gates, and the city elders come out, and they say, we will not resist you, because we know you are prophesied to rule. It says so here in Daniel. And one of the prices that they had to pay to not be sacked by Alexander the Great was that they had to name their male children Alexander in his honor. And you will meet Jews today who are still named Alexander. I have met two personally. One spelled A-L-E-X, Alexander. Another one that was spelled A-L-E-U, or no, J-A-N-D-R or something like that. Alejandra, right? Alejandro. But that's why that's a Jewish name now. Alexander is a Jewish name and still used in Jewish families because Alexander the Great spared Jerusalem, because they said Daniel prophesied that he would be king. So they did not resist him, which was good thinking. Unfortunately, when Antiochus, which is one of the four horns, comes in, they did resist. But prior to the Maccabean revolt, Jason Oniad returned to Egypt, which it says right here. It says, "O Jacob, be not displayed." Let's see if I can find it. We just read it. "Behold, I will punish the multitude, no Pharaoh and king and just gods and all them." Basically saying that when all these changes have happened to Egypt, it'll be safe to be a Jew in Egypt again. I mean, it won't be a problem. And under Ptolemy, it wasn't a problem. The largest Jewish city outside of Jerusalem was Alexandria in Egypt. I mean, it was an Egyptian city under Ptolemy's protection, a Greek king. And in fact, the last Ptolemaic king was Cleopatra. She was the last bloodline descendant of Ptolemy, who she had Julius Caesar's baby, whose name was Caesarion. And Mark Antony, when Julius Caesar was murdered by the Senate, civil war broke out, and Octavius Caesar, which was like a adopted son who was a nephew or cousin of Julius Caesar, gathered up his army, and Mark Antony went down to Egypt to gather up an army and went to go get Caesarion, the bloodline heir of Julius Caesar, and to get the armies of Egypt to go and claim the throne and become the empire of Rome. But he failed to defeat Octavius, and Octavius Caesar became known as Augustus Caesar, which is, when we view the Bible in the New Testament, right off the bat we see Joseph and Mary going to get censused in the city of their birth, or city of Joseph's birth, because he's actually going to vote to name Augustus Caesar the emperor or protector of Rome, I guess would be what they would say, because it was a Roman vassal state at that point. But they had the right to say, hey, we want this guy to be our protector. I mean, no, I doubt there's anybody else that was on the ballot, so to speak, but and probably they were also being taxed. They're like, oh, it's nice to see you. Here's your Social Security card. Let's start paying your taxes to Rome, right? You're a Roman. You're Rome's responsibility. So we need to be able to track what you do, so we can get our piece of you. That's taxation, right? So Jeremiah is prophesying the destruction of Egypt, right? And we saw, I guess it was Ezekiel last week. Let me double check that.
It was Ezekiel.
It was Ezekiel. And Ezekiel prophesied the same thing. Ezekiel went into Babylonian captivity, and he prophesied the same thing. He said, look, Egypt's going to pay for not helping us. Egypt's being handed over like a treasure chest to Babylon, because Babylon destroyed Tyre, and Tyre had it coming for a long time. And, that's it's interesting how the two of them tied together. I didn't even realize that there's the same, two contemporary prophets prophesying at the same time. It took a long time for me to figure out how these guys were in line, like Isaiah's first, then Jeremiah, then Ezekiel. But it's like the time period between them is only, a few decades, even though so much seems to happen. It's like when I was a kid coming up, I always thought that all the prophets were from different time periods and they all had different things, but a lot of them
I thought they were from way far away.
Exactly, but
compared to all the stuff that happens.
Exactly, a lot of them were contemporaries with each other, though. So let me go to, let's move on now to Luke 22. We're going to read Luke 2:22 to 2:24. Luke 2:22. And when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that opens the womb shall be called to Yehovah, and to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or a young pigeon. So even at that time, they knew, and we haven't read it yet, but you'll see after the golden calf that Yehovah says, I take the Levites in lieu of the firstborn of Israel. So he's basically saying the whole firstborn thing isn't going to work for right now, but I will take the Levites who were willing to pick up arms and kill the people who wanted to go back to Egypt, and I will make them my priests for now. And I think that was kind of the empire, and I'm adding for now. But I think that that's implied. And honestly, it may not be implied. He may just simply be saying, look, the Levites are going to be priests forever. They're stuck being Levites. There's nothing that's going to keep them from having to be the slaves of the priesthood. They're stuck. But soon your firstborn will also be slaves of the priesthood. Or actually, excuse me, this okay, let me reverse that. Okay, so Aaron's high priest, right? So only Aaron's household can be the high priest. So Aaron's sons are priests. Okay? So the Levites are slaves of the high priest. The way it works is Yehovah said, I claim the Levites in place of the firstborn, and then he says, now I give the Levites to Aaron. So they become slaves of Aaron. So the priests are Aaron's slaves, or the high priest slaves. So when you see Paul say, I, in Romans 1, how does he address his letter? I, Paul, a slave of Christ. You know, because he's saying, he's claiming that he has an authority as a priest because he's a slave of the high priest. He's in the high priest's household. So he has the authority to speak on behalf of the high priest. So it's everything has a legal ramification and mandate. And if you recall the story of Hannah, the birth of the prophet Samuel, right? So here's the story of Hannah. That's my wife's name. Hannah is childless, but she is the favorite wife of her husband, who has two wives. I think it's Hilkiah, maybe is his name, or Lucky. I can't remember what his name is, but she's his favorite wife. Now his other wife has given him kids, but his other wife gives Hannah heck about not being able to give birth to children. She's like, I don't even know why he keeps you around. You can't give him no babies. That's probably not the way she talked. I'm being exaggerated. But seriously, she gave Hannah a lot of flack about not being able to have children, basically implying that she didn't understand how she could be the favorite wife because she didn't know how to give him children. And she didn't even deserve to be his wife because she couldn't make children for him. So Hannah goes, her husband takes her to all the feasts with him because he loves Hannah. He wants her around. And she goes up and whispers some prayers at the temple, or I guess it would be the tabernacle at that time. Whispers some prayers up there, and Eli, the high priest, is like, get out of here, you're drunk. You don't need to be around here, you've been drinking. She's like, I'm not drunk, I'm whispering a prayer to God. And he's like, well, fine, then your prayer work out, get out of here. And, and God heard her prayer. And basically she cut a deal with God. She said, if you'll give me a child, I'll give the child back to you. Even though he already claimed the firstborn of the womb. Now, we might ask the question, is it the firstborn of every woman or just the firstborn of the first wife to give birth? Well, I guess it's every woman, right? So Hannah, he's already said that child belongs to Hannah. So she cuts this deal with God, and she gets pregnant, and her husband is like, oh, honey, we got to go up to the temple. She's like, well, if I go up the temple, I got to give this child to the temple because I told God if he give me a baby, I'd take him to the temple. And then she looks at him and waits. because she knows that a man has the authority to break any covenant that his wife chooses to make within 24 hours of finding out about it. So she's basically saying, why don't you break that covenant that I made, and we'll pay the redemption price and we'll keep our baby. So he's like, you do what seems well to you. Which you could kind of read as being, well, since you made this bed, you can sleep in it. And you told God you were going to give him our child, so you're going to give him the child. And that's what he does stay with her till she weans him. And then she has to surrender that, and she takes that baby as a slave to the high priest and offers that child at the tabernacle, and he becomes sacred, and that's why he becomes a part of the tribe of Levi, right? And he also eventually becomes what we know as the prophet Samuel. But once she surrenders her child, she declares the glory of God and literally repeats a lot of what's stated in Deuteronomy, and I'd have to read through it again, but she says this prayer, the Song of Hannah is probably what it's called, but she just basically proclaims his glory and how great he is, and how she's so thankful that he gave her the child, and that she understands that she's given him up. But because she did that, she was given more children. Samuel was not her last child. She had a family for her husband, and that's kind of the last you hear of him. You can imagine she probably went and visited Samuel, whenever there was a feast. But then his life is on a different path. And I'm definitely not idol worshiping Samuel because his two sons were not so great. Because the people didn't want them to be judges. And neither were Eli's sons. They were also brats who got killed when the Ark of the Covenant was captured. But anywho, let's read in John.
Hey, can I bring something up real quick?
Sure.
And I was going over this the other day. Luke 2:22 is kind of right before that. In 2:12, we see that the angel said to them, "Be not afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy, which will come to all the people. For you is born on this day a city of David, a Savior, Messiah of the Lord. And this will be a sign for you, a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger."
Right.
Have you ever heard about the swaddling clothes?
Yeah, they're recycled priestly garments. That's what the swaddling clothes were.
That too, but also swaddling clothes were abundantly they were what they used to wrap the sheep in as they were waiting to be for the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
In the manger, basically in the they would not in the manger, but in a I guess it would be barn or whatever. But they would swaddle the sheep and that's why whenever the angels came and they were talking to the shepherds,
mm-hmm.
those shepherds were actually they were watching over the sheep that would be sacrificed as the Passover lambs.
Right.
And they would swaddle them and they would wrap them up, kind of keeping them It was one of the ways they would try to keep them spotless. And
right.
But so it was a sign to Mary, and that sign was that her son was going to be our Passover.
Right.
I mean, he is a sin sacrifice too, but I mean.
So it's a sign.
To as the Lamb of God.
That's excellent, because that's a sign to the shepherds, because the shepherds who had that practice, when they saw it being done to the man, they would immediately said, "Oh my gosh, she's doing exactly what we've been doing." And it's because God's giving a direct message to those priestly shepherds that are minding those flocks. Because, as we stated, I think we said it last week, when you went to the second temple during Christ's time, it was like going to Disney World, and you came with your money, not your sacrifices, because you bought a sacrifice at the temple that was clean, because you didn't know how to keep things clean. So the priests had their own clean sacrifices ready for you to purchase with shekels, which is why you had to convert your Roman money into shekels, because the temple treasury could not take in anything except shekels. So when you're talking about the swaddling clothes, the priestly garments, when they'd wear out, there was a disposal area they put them in at the side of the temple, which was, I think, in the court where the women were allowed to go. And people would come and use them for swaddling clothes for their children, because they were the fine linen garments, right? and you could cut them up and use them for other things. And they'd also use them for the wicks in the menorah in the temple. And if you ever read Alfred Edersheim's Temple and its Ministries, in fact, I brought a... Before we leave today, I'm going to read a little out of Alfred Edersheim's The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, because this is a very highly technical book, full of cited sources from the 1800s, which are my favorite types. He mentions that how the priestly garments were recycled. However, the high priest garment was not recycled. The high priest garment was buried and hidden so that no one could ever find it. That was not to be found and to be reused for any other purpose, because it was too holy to be used for any purpose.
Was it Zechariah that hid the high priest garments on the side of the that he hid them in the temple?
I don't know. Now, is that a reference to the Zechariah that's mentioned in the New Testament, or the Zechariah that's mentioned in the Old Testament?
I think it's in the Old Testament, but I remember it just hit me because I'm thinking, I don't know this, I'm going to have to look it up, but you got to think John, or Yochanan the Immerser, he was really supposed to be the high priest.
And he could have been.
At that time.
Well, I guarantee you that it wasn't the
one. His father was next in line, and that's why, actually, Yeshua, whenever he was on the, whenever what's-his-name ripped his garments, when they were in the temple, Yeshua actually was the follower. He would have followed Yochanan, and he actually did the ceremony, per se, as he was being sacrificed, because he was next in line.
I had heard the...
I did a study on it a while back, but that priest garments were hid. If I'm thinking this is right, they were hidden because all the priests after that were going to be corrupt until John came, or Yochanan did. And I'll have to look it up to be sure, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, track that down. And it might be Zechariah 6:9-14, or Ezra 3, from what I'm seeing on Google, but I can't verify that. But yeah, I mean, hey, I'm sure a prophet knew he better keep the stuff hid. I mean, they say Jeremiah hid the Ark of the Covenant from the Babylonians, but at the same time, they also say the Levites hid the Ark of the Covenant from Manasseh the king. So I don't know who knows where that thing's at. Catholic Church says it's in Ethiopia today, but you can't see it unless God gives you the eyes to see it with. So I do know that about it. You have to have special eyes to see it with. So let's go to John 19:31-37. That's John 19:31-37. The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that the Sabbath day was a high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Then came some soldiers to break the legs of the first, and then the other which was crucified with him. But when they came to Yeshua, they saw that he was dead already, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and from that which forth poured out blood and water. He saw that and bare record, and his record is true, and he knows that what he says is true, that you might believe. For these things were done, that the scripture should be fulfilled, a bone of him shall not be broken. And again, another scripture says, they shall look upon him who is pierced. And I'm not sure exactly how they tie that in with what we read, except that maybe it has to do with the unleavened bread being pierced. They put holes in the dough to make sure that it doesn't get swollen while it's cooking. Sort of like if you ever cook a pizza, you end up with like bubbles that pop up on the crust and stuff. You went ahead and poked holes in the dough, you won't have that pop up on it. Give the air somewhere to get out of it. And I guess that could be why they chose that particular scripture as a parallel to what we read. Does anybody else have any other parallel scriptures that we could relate to what we have read?
There's a lot of parallels. I mean,
oh yeah, they're in there. We just got to find them.
We got what this whole chapter is talking about the Lamb.
I see Shane Mason watching. Shane, find us another scripture, Shane. I see you watching. Shane's my boat captain friend who also can dispel the idea of a flat earth, because he actually knows how to navigate with a ship, and you have to do that on a globe. If you try to do it on a flat map, the mileage doesn't work out properly, and you won't be able to get your ship where you're going. You either come up way short or way long on where you're trying to go. But again, that's just probably part of the conspiracy.
Could be.
The devil made boats. Don't get in them. And planes. God wanted you to sail. He'd have built you with a sail. If he wanted to fly, to give you wings. I'm being silly, but I mean, hey, you know, how far you want to take it. If he wanted you to roller skate, you'd have been born with wheels. So let me read you some of this. Let me read you some of this book. This is the life and times of. I got a phone call. How about that? I'm popular. The life and times of Jesus Christ the Messiah. This is Alfred Edersheim book. And today we have been reading Torah Portion Bo, which means to go. And basically it's the going out of Egypt into the wilderness. I can only reject a call so many times. All right, so let's start. I'm just going to. Gosh, I don't know where to begin. It's like I said, it's as dense as a dictionary, and the spacing of the words is dictionary spacing. So it's a thick one. Let's see. Let me read you something from just the very beginning of this book. This is the kind of stuff that will really help you learn more about what was going on at the time. Chapter 1. The Jewish world in the day of Christ. The Jewish dispersion in the East. Among the outward means by which the religion of Israel was preserved, one of them most important was the centralization and localization of its worship in Jerusalem. So part of the way that the Jewish culture managed to exist and stay together was because there was a temple in Jerusalem. If to some the ordinances of the Old Testament may in this respect seem narrow and exclusive, it is at least doubtful whether without such a provision monotheism itself could have continued as a creed or a worship. In view of the state of the ancient world and of the tendencies of Israel during the earlier stages of their history, the strictest isolation was necessary in order to preserve the religion of the the Old Testament, from that of the mixture with foreign elements, which would speedily have proved fatal to its existence. And if one source of that danger had ceased after the 70-year exile in Babylonia, the dispersion of the greater part of the nation among those whose manners and civilizations would necessarily influence them rendered the continuance of this separation of as a great importance as before. In this respect, even traditionalism had its mission and use as a hedge around the law to render its infringement or modification impossible. That's the first paragraph. Okay. So what he's saying basically is, at the time of the Second Temple, Hellenistic ideas were prevalent because the Greeks had been the rulers of Israel, and then the Romans were now quote-unquote rulers of Israel. I mean, technically it's Herod and his three sons that come after the tetrarchs, or is that four? Is that four sons? I think it's three. I think he had three sons that divided up the kingdom and became the tetrarchs of Galilee. That's Herod Agrippa and Herod Antipas and whoever the other Herod was. But the Roman temples, Roman ideas were prevalent. People in Galilee were being exposed to trade routes from around the world coming through the Silk Road. You got all these other nations that believe in many gods passing through your kingdoms, or excuse me, passing through your borders. I shouldn't say kingdom. Passing through Israel, bringing their ideas, and what's going to hold the Jewish people together? Well, the temple's holding it together, but the Pharisees will tell you the temple is not cleansed. It's not clean because the Aaronic priesthood is gone from it. So what's holding it together? You know, that's where the Pharisees come in and say our traditions are going to hold us together, and that's what Edersheim says there. He says even the traditionalism had its mission and its use, and that's the traditionalism as a hedge around the law, and to render its infringement or modification impossible. So the Pharisees used the oral Torah to build a wall around, well, I should say the halakha. They believe the oral Torah is Torah. So it's not in contradiction to what the written Torah is. It's an expounding upon what the written Torah says. And then the halakha is the actual wall around that you walk to make sure that you never violate what the Torah itself says. I'll read one more paragraph just to enjoy here. Whether a Roman, a Greek, or an Asiatic might wander, wherever they might wander, he could take his gods with him or find kinds of rites that are familiar to his own. He could take his family idols and get on the road and take them with him. That's exactly what Rachel tried to do when Jacob took Rachel and Leah away from Laban. She took the family gods with her because she wanted to take the gods with him. And of course, what did Jacob say? He said, Laban, search the camp. You find whoever took your gods and you can kill them. So that's why Rachel pretended she was on her monthly, so her daddy wouldn't look under her saddle she was sitting on, because he wasn't going to do that. Is Rachel a bad apple? Let's see here. Wherever they might wander, they not only could they take their gods with them, but they would probably find, because most of them are solar cult religions, right? So no matter where they went, they would probably find a people that had similar customs to them, because what does the Roman Catholic Church do today? It's got the whole world set on a solar cult system, which is the same cult the Celts already had, right? So the Gauls, the Galatians, right? The letter to the Galatians is a letter to the Gauls, who were Celtic people. So that's the Druids, right? So they base their year on the cycle of the sun. There's the eight-spoked wheel of fire. There are 8 Sabbaths of the Wheel of Fire. That's both equinoxes, both solstices, and the midpoints between them. In fact, come February 14th, it'll be the midpoint of winter. And what do they call that day? Valentine's Day. Well, what do they call it in ancient Rome? They called it Lupercalia, because it's when the constellation of Lupus, the dog, appears in the sky. And that tells you it's the middle of winter. So, thus begins the time of Lent in the Catholic Church, which is the time of the lengthening of the days, because the days are getting longer and not shorter. And you start to notice that that's the beginning of what comes before spring, and then springtime hits at the equinox, and then, you know, the cycle of life continues over and over again. It's just, since most people were solar cult, they had rituals that followed these days already. I mean, that's why the Roman Catholic Church and the American, I don't know, whoever makes calendars for the United States tells you these things. It's all just part of the Holy Roman Empire and keeping the traditions of Babylon alive. All right, so here we go. So, all right. It was far otherwise with a Jew. He had only one temple, and that was in Jerusalem. Only one God, him who had once throned there between the cherubim. Now, I would like to point out that Edersheim, the ruins of the temple at Leontopolis were not found until the early 1900s. So that's when archaeologists actually uncovered the temple that was in Egypt. So he may not have realized that there was a temple that is mentioned in Philo and in Josephus, where the Jews of Alexandria would go. That's the temple of Leontopolis. they would send money to the temple in Jerusalem because the Pharisees required, they required you pay the 2 temple tax. The 2 drachma tax, which is the quote-unquote temple tax, the half shekel. They made people do that by declaration of, what was her name? They got a Greek queen to sign off on that. And that's how that was created. And all that's in The Temple and Its Ministries by Alfred Edersheim. You can read that. All right, so for a Jew, he had only one temple in Jerusalem and only one God, him who had once throned there between the cherubim, and who was still king over Zion. That temple was the only place where a God-appointed, pure priesthood could offer sacrifices, where, whether for forgiveness of sin or for fellowship with God, here in the impenetrable gloom of the innermost sanctuary, which the high priest alone might enter once a year for most solemn expiation, had stood the ark, the leader of the people into the land of promise, and the footstool on which the Shekinah had rested. From the golden altar rose the sweet cloud of incense, symbol of Israel's accepted prayers, that 7-branched candlestick that shed its perpetual light, indicative of the brightness of God's covenant presence. On that table, as it were, before the face of Yehovah was laid week by week, the bread of the face, and he cites that showbread as bread of the face. And he's got a little citation at the bottom of the page. A constant sacrificial meal which Israel offered unto Yehovah, wherefore Yehovah in turn fed his chosen priesthood on the great blood-sprinkled altar of sacrifice, smoked the daily and festive burnt offerings brought by all of Israel, for all Israel, whether scattered, while the vast courts of the temple were thronged, not only by native Palestinians, but literally by Jews out of every nation under heaven. Under the temple gathered the sacred memories of the past. To it clung the yet higher hopes of a future. The history of Israel and all their prospects were intertwined with their religion, so that it may be said that without their religion they had no history, without their history they had no religion. Thus history, patriotism, religion, and hope alike pointed to Jerusalem and to the temple as the center of Israel's unity. So yeah, that's the way people wrote in the 1800s. Clear and precise and distinct, to make sure that you understood what the point was that they were getting at. And what he's trying to explain to you is that the people alive at the time of Yeshua in the second temple, that temple was everything to them. That's why when the apostles went with Christ, he cried over Jerusalem, because he knew that it would be sieged again, just as it had been in the days of the Babylonians. An army would come, and that army would lay siege, and that they would know what it was like to experience the sword, the famine, the beast. They would know what it was like to experience death by war, starvation behind the walls of a city that had no food coming in, and to be sold into slavery by a foreign nation to become their playthings and their servants. You know, this is the punishment for the covenant breakers. And Yeshua cried because he knew it was coming. You know, and his disciples said, look at this amazing temple. This is unbelievable what Herod has done. He's really gone all out, and all the money in the world is pouring into this place, and this is just amazing. And he says, not one stone will be left standing on another. As much as you have worshipped this place, not one stone will be left standing on another. Now, is that... I mean, it didn't happen until the Bar Kokhba revolt. It was Rabbi Akiva and the Bar Kokhba revolt that really set it off. The destruction of the temple. And you got to understand, when Vespasian came, who would become emperor of Rome, to destroy the temple and to raid Jerusalem and to siege it, he was a follower of the snake cult in Egypt, and I can't remember what the cult was called, but it was a Gnostic cult that was in Egypt at the time. he gets visited by a rabbi who's trying to flee the city, who's brought before him trying to escape in a coffin with all these holy documents that the rabbis didn't want destroyed. And they take him to Vespasian, and Vespasian said, execute this man. And he says, wait, if you don't kill me, tomorrow you will be emperor of Rome. And Vespasian said, all right, I guess he could wait a day to kill that man. So the next day he received word from Rome that he had been voted the emperor, because the previous emperor had died and Vespasian had been chosen to be the new emperor. And that rabbi survived because that happened. He prophesied he would be the emperor. And then his son Titus came and finished the job. And Titus sat there and took the whole thing out. And then, by the way, several years later, God wreaked his vengeance upon Vespasian and Titus and oh gosh, what's his name? It starts with a D. Not Damocles or Dionysian.
Dionysius.
That's Vespasian's grandson? It's the
Dionysius or something like that.
It's the grandson of it's the son of Titus. Hold on. Titus Caesar.
Hey, I've got to roll out. I got to go to that home church.
Go ahead, man. I'm glad you got somebody you can get together with. I really am. And the son of Domitian. That's it. Domitian. Domitian. And within the next few years, God wreaked his vengeance upon those men, and he killed Vespasian and Titus in the same house. One of them bled out. Vespasian died of like a stomach disease in the house, and then Titus, after the destruction of, or maybe it was Domitian, maybe it was Titus that bled out, and then Domitian it was killed. But Vesuvius erupted.
I'll get hold of you later.
Go ahead, man. Go ahead and take off. When you close down the chat, is it going to shut down everybody in it because you're moderator? It may have. I don't know. I'll just keep talking, I reckon. So the emperor and then his son who became emperor were all killed. Yehovah killed them all and killed them in the same house after the eruption of Vesuvius, Mount Vesuvius, which brought darkness and all these terrible things. Lots of stuff that's mentioned in the book of Revelation. It's God taking his vengeance upon them for what they did, even though I'm sure he would tell you it was him that did it. He's the one that did the hardening the hearts and all that kind of stuff. So with all that being said, from what we've learned today about, we've been studying about the plagues, and now we're leaving Egypt, and we're going out into the wilderness, led by Elohim. And Yehovah is the cloud by day and the fire by night. So let's just assume the people see many gods, but there's only really the one. Who is the Echad, right? He's the one God. He is the Echad. He is the one that you might see him as many different things, but it's just him. Wrote a little song about it called Deuteronomy 32. It's I kill, I heal, and I make alive. Because in that section, Moses is telling the Israelites what God said he's going to do and how he's going to take care of business for them and get them into that land. And he'll defeat all their enemies. He said, I'll kill them, and I'm the one that kills, I'm the one that heals, I'm the one that makes alive, I'm the one that handles all this. You got to give him credit. You got to give him his glory, because none can save us from his hand. You want somebody to be afraid of? Be afraid of the living God. I mean, he just took Egypt out. No problem. He didn't even let Pharaoh make a deal with him. He's like, Pharaoh ain't going to cut no covenant with me. I ain't cutting the covenant with Pharaoh. I'm a hard Pharaoh's heart. He ain't going to do nothing except give you a hard time so that I can demonstrate to everyone forever who I am and what I do. I mean, that's an awesome God, y'all. That's the Southern coming out in me, saying y'all there. Well, let me say to you, shalom, and the peace of the Sabbath fall on you and your family. And, Baruch to all of you out there who are, seeking the Father and his glory, and to be good and faithful servants. in the house of the greatest of all servants, which is Yeshua, the high priest. So, don't treat the law like it's thrown out the door. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the old saying goes. Take the time to learn it. Take the time to understand it. Take the time to read it. Take the time to see how it's supposed to apply. Because even though you might feel that you are in an age of grace, and you certainly are, His grace has always abounded. He's always been kind. He's always been gentle. He's always been a gentleman. He's never forced his way onto any woman that he was trying to marry. Put it to you like that. He definitely forced his way on Pharaoh. He just played Pharaoh like a puppet. And right in front of his girl, he's like, look, girl, I'll make him do whatever I want him to do. He doesn't matter. He's a tool, and I'm going to use him for my purposes. Don't be a tool. Be an agreeable, well-behaved servant. Because I promise you, whether you believe in Him or not, He will use you as He sees fit. And there's nothing that can stop His hand. So you might as well get on board with Him and stay. Don't try to stand in front of Him and have Him have to show other folks how He slides obstacles out of His way. Or even worse yet, turns you around and makes you a bulldozer for Him. And you never even realized you were doing it. Get on board with Him. Get in a covenant contract with Him. Talk to Yeshua. Say to Him, please take over my life. I don't know how to live. I don't know how to be a man. I don't know how to give God what He wants. Please help. Just ask for help. He'll give you help. There's a song I remember hearing, Midas Yahoo song. He said, ask God for help. He'll throw you a rope. If you out there sinking, He'll throw you a rope. Just ask for help. That's all you got to do. So again, peace of this wonderful Sabbath upon everybody out there, and whether you're catching this on the Sabbath or not, and Baruch, which is a blessing to you and your family, if you're seeking to be a part of His world and His people. And if you are, I guarantee you will see a positive result in your life. So again,